you're the one for me. And don't you know that I love you more and more. I love you more and more. Hey girl, it ain't no fun.
Hello, friends. Welcome back, ladies, gentlemen, and NBs, to Deshou del La Treize. That's not an exact, that's not exactly Deshou the Third, the Desh X3. It's our Patreon exclusive for a time pod for our lovely $5 tier patrons. And hello to you patrons in the audience right now. Happy Friday to all of you. And those of you in the future listening to this on demand, it may or may not be Friday where you are. And if it's not, I'm sorry for that. But whatever the case, thank you for making us part of your day. Yeah. I am the subtle doctor.
To those of you in the future, from like 2023 XX or whatever it is, that's actually 20,000. Maybe our podcast will still be around all those many years hence. Who knows? But yes, I hope you're all doing well.
You walked all over my introduction. Are you proud of yourself? Are you pleased? Just
no.
Crush T-Rex feet. Just giant all right. We're gonna try it again. Whew. Limbering up. I am the subtle doctor. And to your left on your video screen, he is I was gonna say irreparable, but that's not what I mean. One
fundamentally broken.
That's the word that popped into my mind. That's not correct.
No, you're committed now, and I maybe that's not arguably wrong in some senses either. I mean, this shit ain't coming back to life anytime soon. That's irreparable, all right.
I was looking for a word that meant unique and one of a kind. So I'll just say one of a kind. The hardest working man in pod business, Shadon.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Very excited to talk about this show. And also just very eager to go to that bar. Not obviously through the normal means. I just like to pop in for a visit and then be on my way. Looks like they do good cocktails there.
I know, whatever it was they poured through. No, so I'm not a frequenter of bars, pubs, or clubs. So this may or may not be normal, but it looked like a drink was being poured through like a pepper shaker. Like what he was pouring out of, the lid had a bunch of holes in it, as if it was as if there was, a child's insect being kept in there. So it was as a pet, with the holes poked in the top. So is that normal to pour drinks through a lid like that?
I don't know. Maybe Dessim seasons his pizza by shaking a cocktail shaker.
Yeah.
Maybe he does
Right.
maybe he does things backwards. Maybe it's opposite day at the bar. He seems like a strange guy. So I wouldn't put it past him. Although I am very, very glad that the character or the person based from Mushiki is getting work again, because he looks exactly like the lead character from that.
He really does look like the main from Mushishi. I wish I could remember his name. That's a show that people will probably get mad at me about saying this about, but I've never finished it. It's one that I've started on a couple different occasions, and I just wasn't able to stick with it. It's very good. I liked it a lot. I had no big complaints about it, except that it just didn't kind of hold my attention.
Maybe the two shows are in continuity with each other. I mean, Mushishi is all paranormal stuff, Maybe Dessim is his brother, and he's just like, well, I've got a paranormal investigator bum brother somewhere out there who constantly chain smokes. I don't know why he's doing it. I'm sure he's fine.
He loves to make mannequins. I don't know
Well,
why. No one knows why.
Well, don't both of them actually can in that case, given the the bar, because they got the mannequin thing in the background.
That's what I meant.
That's sorry. I thought you were referring to the Shishi guy. Yes.
No, the only thing I know the only thing I remember about Mushishi, apart from the ubiquitous presence of fireflies, is he would talk to spirits and like soothe them. He was kind of a like spirit calmer downer. It's not not of the spirit slaying variety like Mob Psycho, which is something I'll bring up again in a moment. But yeah, more of a like, we need to rest now. We need to chill. That's what I recall anyway.
Chillax.
It was very sad. It was a sad show. Maybe that's part of why I couldn't stick with it. So
well, you're sticking with this one regardless, and this is a sad show.
Well,
because well, yes and no, but I think we need to get the content warning out there that once again we're discussing a topic we have covered many, many times on this show. It just keeps happening. There is a content warning for discussion of suicide, familial abuse, the usual stuff. Because that comes up in episode 4 specifically. So you have been warned. Just that happened.
right.
Plenty to talk about with respect to that as well, I must say. Particularly personally, I'll add as well, because if you've listened to the podcast for a long time, you'll know I've had my own issues dealing with that, and also with broken families, of which that factors in as well. And I was like, oh boy, we're doing this again, aren't we? I just tried to get away, and I can't. It just keeps coming back around. It's like the most vindictive boomerang ever.
It's almost as if the core problems being talked about are kind of universal or something. They keep being visited again and again.
My God.
I'm just saying, this is just a wild theory I'm throwing out there. I mentioned at the top that this is our Deshou the third show, which is a Patreon exclusive for a week anyway. Pod, and it goes to the $5 tier patrons. And if you'd like to, join that illustrious group, head on over to patreon.com/Warui Deshou. WARUI DESHOU is how you spell that. It translates to "it will probably be bad," and it's referring to our podcast, of course, and our content that we make. But we think that can be good if enough care and enthusiasm are put into it, and also if it's somewhat funny. But if you join at that tier, you'd get this show and everything we do as soon as it's available. You would get also to be part of our Discord and ask questions about anything we're going to cover that we have to answer on the podcast. So if you want to, quiz us about Death Parade, find out what we think about certain characters, moments, what have you, join the Discord, get involved, pop into the Deshou the Third channel, and ask away your questions about this so far excellent show. Shadon, what is your little review snippet? If you were going to be put in the paper, if you were going to get 3 or 4 lines in the old paper, Manchester Shadon says, and then you get your little quotesies about Death Parade. What would you say?
Well, I'm going to plagiarize a little bit here, and because Johnny Rackham, one of our patrons, has said a show of messy, imperfect people. To which I will then amend slightly and say it is a messy, imperfect show about messy, imperfect people. There are a couple of mild issues with it. I'm overall positive on it. Some of my feelings on it I've not quite settled on yet because I can't quite decide how I feel one way or the other about 1 or 2 particular elements of the show and analyses I have of it. It's kind of basically I'm being Schrodinger's reviewer, the Mr. Fence sitter right here, and maybe with Doc's help I'll come to a conclusion on it. But that being said, we are going to discuss episodes 1 through 4. I actually did also watch, for context, the standalone episode created 3 years prior called Death Billiards in anticipation, because I figured it would come up in discussion. I thought I should at least arm myself with that. And I will say that Death Billiards is a great one-shot concept, worthy of expanding into an actual show. And from the first 4 episodes I've watched, I'm very glad they were given the opportunity to do so, to expand on that one-shot concept. Because in theory, you could have just made Death Billiards and moved on. It was a great one-shot. It was nice. It was a nice 25-minute thing. It didn't absolutely cry out for expansion, but I'm very happy it did. And funnily enough, one of my talking points later will be a structural comparison of how the writers started creating Death Parade and how they introduced both new and existing audiences if you came from Death Billiards, and why it's actually pretty spot on and perfect how they've handled it for both groups. But that discussion will come later. So I know, again, that was meant to be back in the box things, but basically it's not flawless. I think there are issues with it. I think in particular, I know one of our patrons has asked a question about this. I think that there's something a tiny bit misogynistic about how it handles the female characters. I say a tiny bit, with the way some of them are portrayed. And on top of that, I also have to wonder if perhaps the show maybe is a bit more shallow than it might otherwise appear to be. But this is, again, my Schrodinger's reviewer, Mr. Fence-Sitter problem here. And we will get into that later with some deep discussion. This is like, we're going Mariana's Trench here. Down low, depths of the earth. Ooh, we're delving too greedily and too deeply here. So lots to talk about. But overall, I am still positive on it. Like, this show has a lot of great moments in it. And also, again, just for the people who might not want to hear us talk about the more sensitive stuff later, with relation to the suicide plot that happens in episode 4, that is handled very tastefully. It is not the most effective or tasteful handling of that subject matter that I've seen. I think Orange still probably is above it in that respect. But one also must give credit to Death Parade for its format being just one-offs for pairs of characters are introduced and then gone from the remainder of the story, at least so far. And in that respect, as a self-contained story for that particular character, it was handled really, really well, in my opinion.
Okay. A lot of stuff you brought up there that I actually hadn't thought about very much, so I'm looking forward to getting into the meat of that.
Oh boy.
For my newspaper snippet, I would probably say something like, this is a I hesitate to call it an anthology series, but it is quite episodic in its nature by and large. But like just a series of stories that you offer some really compelling human drama, a very neat kind of fun and clever conception of the afterlife, all in a package that is fairly impeccably produced for the time. And that's kind of what I would say. Like to get into too much more of my thoughts on the show would like get into like a lot of details and stuff. But broadly speaking, I really like it. I think that director who we'll be talking about, Yuzuru Tachikawa, I think like it is my least favorite of the so far. I mean, I've only seen 4 episodes. Thus far, it's my least favorite of the works of his that I've seen, but like that is, that's like saying your least favorite, flavor of ice cream or pizza or something like that. Like it's still really good. This is some elite company because he's made some really good shows as we'll talk about here in a minute.
I mean, Fellowship of the Ring is my least favorite Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movie, not counting the later ones, of course.
Yes.
I mean, of the original trilogy. I had to clarify that on the fly because I realized what territory I was walking into there. But point being, of course, like, for filmmakers who like have such a consistent standard, they'll still have their worst. But as you are right to note, like, even if this isn't your favorite, that doesn't make it bad. It just doesn't quite necessarily match up to the standard of the other works they've done. And that's fine. Like, no creator's flawless,
Mm-hmm.
No creator continually bats strike, gets a home run every single time they make it work. It's impossible. So
yeah, I can do not but agree. So before we get into Patreon questions and our own discussion, I'll just briefly talk about the history of the show and one of the creatives involved with it. As Shadon mentioned early on, the genesis of this show is from a short that was made for something called Anime Mirai, Future Anime, in February 2013. So what is Anime Mirai? Well, back then, and the Japanese government may still be doing this now. I'm not actually 100% sure, but for a few years there in the 2010s, there was like an initiative from the government to like basically give grants to anime creatives like studios and things like that to come up with things like this as part of a big showcase. And its name changed through the years. I think this might be the only year it was called Anime Mirai. It changed to something else. This is, I feel like Yukinon would know this immediately if he was available, but yeah, it's paging Yukinon, paging Yukinon,
paging Dr. Yukinon.
Yeah, 404 at the front desk. But like, yeah, the government was like, hey, we realize that our pop culture is a very valuable export. The whole cool Japan mythos, right? And so it wanted to put some money into that to help build it up even more and get more kind of international interest in its animation. And as anime has only grown in popularity in the years since, I mean, I don't know how big of a factor things like Anime Mirai were, but like, clearly they were onto something that anime could continue like gaining more and more popularity and more mind share in places like America and the UK. So I think I was going to say their heart was in the right place, but this is clearly a financial matter. But they were in the they had they were following a good trail here. They knew what they were doing. They had good instincts.
But you know what this reminds me of? I firstly want to know, actually, before I get into that, is Death Raid, or rather Death Billiards, as a concept, like, is not something I would have thought would have come out necessarily of a attempt to make more anime that was commercially successful, because I think the concept is pretty, like, digestible. It's certainly not it's not like, say, got the complexity of, say, an Ihara work, for example,
Mhm.
or or things like that. But I wouldn't have also, say, put it in the same kind of like mass market appeal as something like more modern, say, like My Hero Academia or even Dragon Ball. The things that have become wildly successful because of their shonen like arcs. And this is definitely not a shonen show by a long shot. But what it reminds me of, and this is what this dovetails into, is in the UK, at least for a while, I don't know if this is still the case or not, a lot of independent film was funded by the National Lottery that we have over here.
Mm.
So that would be like given, so for example, Film 4, which is a subsidiary of our Channel 4, and they would make a number of films as a result. In fact, I think from around the time Death Billies came out was also like The Last King of Scotland, which was a film featuring I cannot remember his name, even though he's one of my favorite actors, James McAvoy. There we are. And I cannot remember his name either. He was playing Idi Amin, basically. It was a story about Amin. But that was like not exactly, of course, a mass appeal film, but still more of basically more for the art rather than the profit. And that's how I feel about Death Parade or Death Billiards and then Death Parade as well, is that I like the idea of this initiative. This is the kind of anime it was ultimately supporting the creation of, even if not all of them, of course, made it to the point where they became full-fledged series, because at least they were allowing people to demonstrate both their animation chops, but also to tell stories that are not strictly, here's a boy who's got a special power, and he's going to go to school, and he's going to train his special power, etc., etc. You've heard it all before, and as much as I complain about that, again, from the business side of things, that's what brings the money in. So, there's a reason that Demon Slayer has done as well as it has. And having watched most of it myself, I'll tell you, it's not because it set my world on fire with its scintillating writing or anything like that, but because it's got
what is this like? Every week you're just like, it's time to slag off Demon Slayer now. It's part of the podcast, a segment.
Hey, and I'm under contract. I just haven't told you about it yet.
Demon Slayer is good. That's the last word.
Fine. It is acceptable. It is the 20 chicken nugget share box of anime.
Oh no, it has so much more heart than that. Oh my god. It's way better than that. It is obviously a Wendy's meal. No. No, it's really good. I like it a lot, actually.
It's more Olive Garden, is it? Is that right?
Yeah. No.
And when we say Olive Garden, it's not the breadsticks, of course, that come out in infinite quantities. Look, joke as I may about Demon Slayer and all that stuff, like, again, I'm only trying to point out the business reality behind those shows and the fact that they are successful. I'm not saying they're devoid of artistic merit, of course, but rather I'm talking about a kind of sliding scale. Death Parade to me definitely does not fit on the mass market intended commercial success side of thing, which is why I find the idea of this government initiative to help fund this kind of project really fascinating and also like pretty cool. Nice one, Japan. Nice one, Japanese government. You got something right. Congratulations.
Hey, broken clock and all that, blind squirrel, etc., etc.,
etc., etc.
Yeah, but I guess it was maybe a year later they announced like, hey, or 18 months later they're like, yo, Death Billiards was really good, and so Madhouse is going to bring the director Yuzuru Tachikawa back to do Death Parade, based on Death Billiards, full-on TV series, that kind of thing. And if the name Yuzuru Tachikawa sounds familiar to you, it should, because we have covered one of his shows quite in depth on this podcast. That will be Decadence.
Shit.
Yeah, he was the director of Decadence and storyboarded a bunch of it. And that was an excellent show. And I think I certainly will be doing this later, but I'll just plant a little seed now that I think contrasting this show, Death Parade, with Decadence could yield some really interesting food for thought. Also, a little thing, you may have heard of it, Mob Psycho 100, seasons 1 and 2, director, wrote the scripts, well, not all the scripts, but a few scripts for season 2 of Mob Psycho. And so, like, this is what I mean when I say Death Parade sorry, you are the least favorite thing that Yuzuru Tachikawa has directed that I've seen. And
I mean, that's Exalted Company, though. To be fair.
And I mean, he's done like other stuff, of course, storyboarded an episode directed on several different shows. I mean, I think notably, he got to storyboard 5 episodes and be an episode director for a couple of episodes, and was the overall assistant director for a show called Terror in Resonance, which was a Shinichiro Watanabe TV show. It came out, I think, a couple years before, or maybe a year before Death Parade. I believe it was before Death Parade. But anyway, this was Tachikawa getting to work with, the man, the myth, the legend, the director of Cowboy Bebop and Samurai Champloo. So, and I wouldn't say like, oh, he's like a Watanabe protege, or you could see a lot of things in his work, but I think there is something similar about his work and Watanabe's work in that, like, I feel like the things that he's directed do have something about them that make them appealing to international audiences. They're not just sort of, very Japanese shows that are totally for Japanese people. And there's nothing wrong with shows like that, but I mean, I think Watanabe is just famous for making these shows that are huge hits abroad. And I feel like Tachikawa, there's a little bit of that about him and the stuff that he's done as well. And also, I should mention, we're not going to go into too much depth about this person, but Shinichi Kurita was the character designer for this show, but also the character designer for Decadence. Did you, when you saw this, like, did you think there's the Decadence guy? Because
no,
I definitely didn't.
Absolutely not. In our collective defense, half of the characters in Decadence were weird, like, Haybot characters. So
yes. Yeah, but the humans even look different. Whereas in this show, I feel like, I don't know, they almost sort of look like the I can't remember the lady's name that did Full Metal Alchemist.
Oh, sorry.
That almost looks like her character designs kind of evolved ever so slightly. Because they're not made to be super cute or like mega appealing, at least most of them. They're maybe a character here and there, but like all the human characters anyway, I feel like there's a difference there. They're not like, going for mass marketability. And maybe that's part of like what you're feeling, right? When you look at this show and you're like, this doesn't feel like a show that is made to do that in terms of its characters.
That said, I do think Decim and Chiaki, like, I think that they're definitely designed in a way to inspire shipping discussion between the pair of them. Who knows? Maybe that even becomes textual by the end of the show. We've only watched the first 4 episodes. But I just get that feeling. And part of that, I think, is the OP. But also I just think, like, he's like the aloof, like, mysterious bartender. And he's got, like, the white hair and all that. And then you got her and, like, she's all new. I don't know. I can totally see there being discussions when this came out about shipping the pair of them.
Oh no. Right.
No, not Nona. It's Chiaki. Like, isn't that her name?
Well, there's Nona, but there's also Ona.
Because I looked this up on Mal before, or Wikipedia rather. This is where I go look again and check her name. You mean
the black-haired woman at the bar?
Yes.
So
yes.
Mal has her as Kurokami no Ona. She does not know her name.
Chiyuki, apparently.
Okay. This is under spoiler tags, maybe. Yeah, right. That's a spoiler. So at this point in the show, she doesn't know her name. She's just called Ona. There's Ona and Nona.
Well, knowing her name on its own, I don't think is the end of the world. To be quite honest, it doesn't like tell us anything about her. Just
how could you? You ruined it for me.
I could just go with calling her college era Matisha Adams.
Yes, let's do that. Morticia.
Sorry, but I can see it.
Oh, I'm with you. I'm with you. I feel like, cousin or maybe aunt of the chick in Brother Dear Brother, Onisama A.
Yes, yes.
The one that Ann and Lindsay used as her avatar for so long.
Yeah.
Like there's a relation there. But anyway, that's all we got this week, focusing on Yuzuru Tachikawa, and just a director I'm really excited about. And it's cool to go back and revisit what I think Death Billiards was his directorial debut, and then Death Parade, I want to say, was like the first thing. I couldn't find any other directorial credits. I know he only got started in the business in 2006. And then at Madhouse, right? And then he became freelance in 2010, and then was brought back into Madhouse to do what we already talked about, the billiards and the parade. So yeah, that's our creative segment.
That's a kind of meteoric rise, actually, when you think about it. To go from Death Billiards to the full-fledged version of your show, to then doing both seasons of Mob Psycho when they started coming out, and then, of course, Decadence. That is a substantial ascent from where you start. And it's deserved, in my opinion, don't get me wrong, but wow, like, you just look at that and you think that this kind of arc would have happened over a couple more years. But still, hey, all fair play to them.
Definitely. So, before we do Patreon questions, Shadon, I think this particular show, I'm gonna do something a little different, and I've not told you about this beforehand, but hear me out. I think you'll think it's useful. Due to the kind of show this is, I think it would behoove us to frame all of our discussion by like talking about the core concept of the show, who the main players are.
Yes.
What the rules are, what's going on here. So
yeah,
do you mind kicking that off?
I certainly will. And I think that's a fair point, because the context behind what's going on is important. And as you rightly point out, we'll frame a number of points I've got. So if anything, I'm just saving myself time later. Anyway, to the point at hand. So there is a bar. It is a bar for which you go there and you have no memory. But there's another person there with you. They have no memory either. And so you're both rather confused about what's going on. And there's this white-haired dude with which covers one eye entirely. And he's got weird eyes, and he speaks in a weird manner. Like he's almost kind of like not robotic, but halfway between that and being more animated. And there's, of course, college-age Morticia Addams with him behind the bar. And they say, we need you to play a game. Your lives depend on it. And you have to hit a button. And the button picks the game. And the game is not anything like outlandish or something you might not have heard of before. The game can be something like darts or billiards or even an arcade game for that matter. And so you play against the person who you're there with. And as you're playing, you start feeling these pains inside of you. Physical pains. But you also start getting memories that are back of who you are. And eventually, after many rounds of this game in which you fight against this person through the game and maybe even outside of it, because you've been told your life is in danger, you and them come to a realization that you're dead. And what's happening here is this chap who calls himself Decim is an arbiter, and he is there to judge you, as a person and your compatriot, the person you may or may not know from your previous life, before sending you either to heaven, where you'll be reincarnated. It's not a Christian-style heaven, strictly speaking. It's more maybe the Buddhist reincarnation concept. Oh, Doc's holding his hand up.
No, I'm just gesturing towards heaven. That's all. Sorry. Forgive me.
Right. I
apologize.
I thought it's okay. I can confirm this will be on the test. But then, of course, there is also hell, and it's not, of course, the sulfur, smelling like sweaty pithole of hell that we all know from pop culture. It is just, again, your soul is basically just dissipated and gone forever, like evaporating water, how it just spreads out. It's gone. And so winning the game in of itself is not necessarily what determines if you are reincarnated or not, but rather it is just through a means of which Decim tests your character. So Death Parade to sum up, is essentially a show about limbo and final judgment. Very St. Peter-esque, at the gates of heaven, telling you whether or not you're allowed in or not. Maybe St. Peter is a bouncer in Death Parade, perhaps. I don't know.
Although crucially different in a certain aspect that I will talk about later. But you've done a great job summarizing everything. There is one character that we didn't mention, and I feel like in the episodes we've watched up to this point, I mean, we know who she is, but they haven't really played that big of a part. Nona, see, all we know is they're basically the manager of this bar.
The curious thing to know as well, and then this is just plays into part of Death Parade's overall mystery, and the questions the audience asks as they go along, is that Nona is basically a young. She looks a little bit like Beatrice from ReZero, a tiny little bit.
Sure.
Yeah. But she is physically younger than Decim. You would think that Decim would be, the person in charge because of his age and all, or at least his appearance. But that's not so. There is no apparent chronological hierarchy as far as the characters. So their age is not necessarily tied into their role. But what that currently means at the moment and what's going on with this bar, the whole reason this whole system exists is currently not known to us. And it may well not be. And that's something I'm going to discuss later. But anyway.
Yeah. There's, this character, who knows how much of a role they play, but I just want to point them out because I never, ever thought I'd encounter an anime character named Clavis. And yet I have. I know that in Japanese they pronounce his name Kuravisu, but
you mean
Clavis is what I read the elevator operator.
The cut fifth Final Fantasy 15 party member.
Exactly. Yes, I definitely mean that person. So Clavis is running the elevator and laughing at people. But okay, so we have broadly speaking the construct laid out. So let's dive into the Patreon questions.
We will indeed. So I'm going to start with one here from Navy Sheriff. Shouts to Navy. By the way, just want to give a quick shout to Navy's work as well. Navy does some writing occasionally on anime for a site. I can't remember what site. Go to Navy Sheriff's Twitter account at Navy Sheriff. Definitely go check it out. But anyway,
he's a good writer. They're a good writer. Pardon me.
How about the stark contrast between the OP and the actual concept of the show? What do you think about that choice? Do you want to field this one first, Doc? Or...
Well, I'm going to reveal something.
Uh-oh.
And that is that I didn't pay attention to the opening because I just hardly ever do. And I'm bad. I watched it. I skipped it on episodes 2 through 4. I watched it in episode 1. I just don't really recall it, except for that shot at the end where they're pointing toward the sky. Does he mean maybe the jocular nature of it with all the dancing and all the fun they're having?
Yeah,
it's kind of coming back to me now. Versus the more kind of somber nature of the show. I don't know. I mean, what do I think about that choice? I mean, certainly the show itself, having seen Death Billiards, is what I expected the show to be. Perhaps the OP is more the outlier here, and that was a curveball. But I don't know. I mean, it kind of almost reminds me in a way of the Blood Blockade Battlefront ending. Have you seen this show, Shadon?
I have not, no.
Okay, I'd recommend it. It's quite good. The first season was directed by the lady who directed Kyoso Giga. So the second season was not, but it's still good. But no, it's a really cool sort of show about people with superpowers and stuff. It's very good. But the ending kind of contrasts with a lot of the tone of the show, from what I remember anyway. And it's almost it's like a J-rock song, but everyone is dancing on like a lounge stage, and they're all like palling around and hanging out. And I don't know, maybe the idea with that and the Death Parade OP is to give you a little bit of relief when when you know you're gonna go into a story that can be grim at times.
Yeah, it's totally a very somber show, but there are moments interspersed in the show of humor. Usually between, I'm going to just say a name because, again, knowing her name is not a spoiler in my opinion because it doesn't fundamentally change what we know about her, which is Chiyuki. Like with her and Desim, like when she's like yelling at him about how he's interfering with the games and all that. Like that's fun and enjoyable. There's good banter between the two of them. But for the most part, the tone is somber and moody. I mean, it is literally, hey, you're in limbo and you're about to get judged if you go to heaven or hell or not, or rather, if you get reincarnated or not. So inevitably, the tone will be. It reminds me a lot, I would say, of the kind of. It reminds me of some way of like the music of the 2000s. That I'm not gonna. Maybe emo is not the right word, but more like.
No, I know what you mean.
I think you might get the general mood of that. Where I'm not talking like this out and out depressing, but rather it's got that kind of tinge of sadness to it. Anyway, with respect to the OP, in a vacuum, I like it. Compared to the rest of the show, I think that once the show actually gets going on an episode by episode basis, the OP doesn't linger in my mind. Like, I think that it's one of those strange things where an OP, when it's like plot relevant or like informs the show's content, then it matters. But if it doesn't, then it's not the end of the world, I don't think, because it can become, by its very nature, structurally, it can be compartmentalized. About the best theory I have is that this is essentially what that director did, whose name I've forgotten. Basically, having now been confirmed that he gets the full show, he's like, I'm going to go fucking nuts on this OP. I get to do whatever the fuck I like, and I'm going to have a dance number. I'm going to animate the pair of them dancing because I can do. And you know what? More power. It's a great OP, as I say, in a vacuum. It doesn't really fit with the rest of the show, but I don't think it detracts from it either.
Oh, gosh. I'm just realizing this because I was going to try to grab who directed the OP. It looks like the director himself storyboarded it.
There you go.
And directed it. Yeah, the director did direct. But the ED was directed by, his name has come up, but I didn't know he was this closely connected with the show. Shinichiro Watanabe directed the ED for the show.
Man.
Very
that
cool.
Explains a lot. The ED is apart from episode 3, it is quite the thing.
The real
hell.
folk blues.
Well,
that's while you were talking, I thought a little more about this question, because I think it is an interesting one. Are you familiar with omake?
Nope.
The concept of omake. It's sort of like bonus features or bonus material like that is included in DVD sets or whatever. And oftentimes it's like characters in a show acting out a funny skit. In a visual novel I just finished called The House in Fata Morgana, which is a freaking incredible video game. Maybe the best video game story ever. But like,
Ooh.
It is, to say it is intense and harrowing, is an understatement. That is a heavy story. But once you beat it, you unlock a bonus feature called Backstage. And you can go backstage and all the characters talk to you as if you're like a person touring through the set that they just acted out a play on. And they're like, hey, here's the motivation for my character. Hey, we're going to do some banter with the other characters, even though we hated each other in the story. We're doing some fun banter. And this is like freaking Gendo Ikari doing like the toothpaste ad or the shaving cream ad. It's like there is this like tendency to think about like anime characters as like the characters themselves rather than like embedded in their story. And that's the context in which they live. they're actually like, you know, actors being put in the story, and you can pull them out of it to like put in these different scenarios, and they're like all fundamentally these like silly, you know, good-hearted people that will like do a dance in a bar in one context, and then like, oh, it's time for the serious story. And I can totally understand how that would be like disarming to people, or like it would just feel jarring. And I don't know, it's just something that I've kind of gotten used to over time, but it is odd. I have to, it is decidedly, I don't know, it feels decidedly like a product of Japanese visual pop culture to me.
Yeah. I mean, despite what you might think, business at the bar does seem very slow, to be quite honest. So maybe they have enough downtime to do this sort of stuff.
Yeah, right.
There's only so many times. Maybe it's the lead up to them practicing a musical number to fundraise for the bar.
I mean,
like it's a charity drive.
How many, you know, how many pairs of people like die that could be narratively linked in the way that they are? I mean, there has to be a fair bit of downtime between these things, because Shadon mentioned that people come in pairs, they have to die at exactly the same time.
Yes, that's right.
So, I mean, I know that, you know, obviously, if you want to take all that seriously, the people dying all the time because we live in a hellscape, et cetera, et cetera. But it's funny to think like this bar that is the bridge between life and the afterworld. It's like, well, what do we do with ourselves in between things? Let's practice a song, you know, let's get a musical number ready.
Mm-hmm. I mean, might as well have a drink or 20 while we're there.
Right.
Can like, you know, can like holy arbiters and reincarnated spirits get hangovers? I feel like that's an important question this show must answer at some point.
Who was talking about this recently? I just was watching something where this very question. Oh, it was Claymore. Yeah, the girls are like technically not human anymore, and it's like they're all drinking and one of them is drunk, and someone's like, wait a minute, like, is this a thing? Can we get drunk? And it's like, well, we can choose to get drunk. Basically, we can like decide to let the alcohol affect our bloodstream or not. We have that much sort of subatomic control of our bodies. So one of them was like, I'm getting drunk, I'm just doing it.
I mean, never mind patron questions, I'll put a question to the chat. Do you think ghosts and angels can get pissed? Answers on a postcard.
Twitter poll. Put it up. All right. Thank you, Navy. Let's go to the next.
Next questions. So this next one comes from Riku. It's not Final Fantasy X Riku. It's Re_KU. RE_KU. First question. Do you think the death gain system is being presented as potentially suspect, broken, unfair, and how? Right. Oh boy. Because oh boy.
Talking point, I'm sure that we had written down, both of us.
This I did. This I indeed did. And I think the immediate answer I have to give is yes, because we actually have on record from the first two episodes that Decim came to a judgment based on incomplete information. That is factual. Mm-hmm. That happened. And therefore, I mean, this is the same as in any justice system where, you know, if you have a percentage rate of people like with capital punishment, you know, if you accept that an X number of people out of how many go through that who are killed by capital punishment are innocent, then the same applies in a similar thing here. If there is a failure rate of this, you know, judgment system and it exists, then, well, it is fundamentally broken. And just by virtue of them being one of them, you know, that must have happened before. And this is also, I think, why Chiyuki is actually there, because this is a really interesting thing I think the show does, depending on how you look at it. And this could also potentially be me reading way too much into it, as I am often want to do. So to answer Riku's question initially, the show gives us categorical, like, textual evidence that it does not work. Even if they made the right call in that particular case in episode 1, that doesn't mean that they don't make the wrong call again, because Decim came to that conclusion by, having incomplete information. It's like you said before, broken clock can still be right twice a day.
Yeah, I would also, I don't want to derail you here, but I just want to chime in and say, I would argue, at least in Nona's opinion, that Chiyuki / Ona was also wrong. So that two bad calls were made. Because at the end, she's thinking about that first case again and saying like, well, actually, you know what? This guy was so distrustful. He would never have been happy. He would never have had a happy life. Like he would never be happy no matter what. And then she says, well, I actually think Chiyuki has a long way to go. I think she's not necessarily great here or perfect. She's got to improve. So I guess one could argue that both calls were screwed up in that case, but that doesn't affect the point that you're saying. I just wanted to chime in. But go ahead.
So prepare for me really going all in on this, because let's firstly pose a question here, which is this system of going to the bar and being judged the, for lack of a better phrase, official like mono religious afterlife? Is it the one afterlife that exists? Is it the official de facto way in which people are judged as by whatever higher power has put Deshou in there? Notwithstanding the fact that the bar is empty, that amusing fact. Like, firstly, we have to ask, is that the case? Or do we get into the conspiratorial stuff where it's like, actually, no, this is some sort of method of feeding souls to Yog-Sothoth or something like that, where it turns out that the man behind the curtain is actually an extra dimensional being that feeds on the dead. That would be a fun twist, by the way. That's not me complaining. But if we take the first answer, which is that this is the official, this is Death Parade's own version of St. Peter, or whatever, divine judgment system that you find in religion, then what I find really fascinating is that it is therefore inherently deeply critical of that. It is deeply critical of religion as an endpoint for judging one's value in life, and asserts that even, that there is no omnipotent presence that can accurately judge people. Because Deshou, even though he has access to the memories of people, there are two key points. One of which is he doesn't seem to have access to all of them, at least not as presented. And two, he is completely unable to ascribe value to these memories in the way that Chiyuki can. That's where she, for example, discusses the fact that in the first two episodes, there's the wife, whose name is Machiko, and she has an affair. And the thing is, though,
she does not.
What? Does she not? I could have sworn that. Well, she was in bed with a dude.
Oh wait, no, that's what you were saying. Yeah, no, you're right. I'm sorry. You're totally right. But it wasn't. It wasn't the ongoing thing that the husband thought it was. It was like a one-time thing that happened a long time ago.
Yeah,
and it was like a one-night stand that she felt really guilty about. So
yeah,
that was You're my bad.
But what I mean by that is, if you strip away all of the context from that, that is a bad thing still that's happened.
Sure.
She was with him at some point.
She made a mistake.
And I don't recall the show necessarily being specific about how recently that one night stand was before the marriage, because I think we can agree, Doc, that the closer that was to the marriage, the worse it is, relatively speaking.
Yeah. No, you're right. I hear you, what you're saying. The only thing we do know is that it definitely is her husband's baby.
Yeah. So there's that. Sorry, I lost train of thought. But what I was going to say though is with that context strip, that is a bad thing for sure. But can we afford no sympathy to her for doing that? I think it's one of those situations where we can still say it was a bad thing, but we can understand how she came to doing that. Mm-hmm. And this leads me. This is the rabbit hole that's been opened here. This leads me into something else, which is I'll firstly end by saying I love the idea that Death Parade is being critical of the idea of religion as a judgmental force when it can offer no. And by religion, I'm of course talking through Deshou, of course, and his fellows. Mm-hmm. It can offer no real qualitative examination of the worth of a human being. That's why Chiyuki's there, because she has to offer her own insight, and is inherently flawed anyway. because he cannot view all the necessary memories that would be there. But does that not then also extend to us as the audience? And this is where shit really goes better. But buckle up your seats, Dorothy, because Kansas is going bye-bye here. Because whether we like it or not, when we watch the show, we are in turn invited to judge the characters in it. And the show doesn't even tell us to do that. There's no wink or nod or anything like that. It doesn't like get didactic about that. It is just an inherent part of how we process this particular text. I defy anyone to go through watching this show and engaging it and not coming out with an opinion on the characters within. I think that's fundamentally impossible. I defy you, for example, to say that you watch episode 4, you watch what happens to Yosuke, and you just completely come out thinking nothing about him. That's impossible. I defy you to do that. Like, you'd have to be a Google algorithm to do that, basically.
Right.
Yeah. So, inevitably, this is not just a question of the appraisals that Decim has on the characters, but also us. And this is where we run headfirst into what I think is probably going to be my biggest criticism of Death Parade. But again, this is where I get into my fence-sitting problem as well, because we don't get, in my opinion, enough information to make a concrete conclusion on a lot of the characters in these episodes. I know that sounds contradictory to what I just said about the fact that you can't feel anything. I've fought back and forth about the characters we've seen thus far, with the exception of Yosuke, who I think is pretty unambiguously sympathetic. That to me seems pretty rock solid there. But I mean, going back to Machiko, for example, she had that one night stand. But what was the context to that? What was the build up to it? What was the lead up to her doing that? What pressure was she under? Like, in her own emotional state? Like, was she emotionally fragile? Did she feel like, what happened in the run up to that?
I think she was. I would say she's unambiguously like, I'm good with her. Much like I don't think she was a bad person.
No.
You know what I mean? I think her and Yosuke, you could say that about.
No. Let me backtrack. Don't concern yourself right now with coming up with a conclusion one way or another, but rather I'm talking about having information to come up with a more informed one. It could very well still be this. You still feel the same. But by virtue of the way this show is constructed, it can only have a very limited amount of time giving backstory on its characters. And that to me makes it feel like it's difficult for us as an audience to judge the characters in there and then also simultaneously criticize Decim's inability to do so. Because he, of course, only has access to the memories that he does, but by extension, we only have access to the memories the writers choose to portray to us, which is a very short amount. And then you run into more problems where you could argue then, well, maybe the message is that there is no way for us to concretely judge anyone ever on the basis of their experience. We'll always have an incomplete picture. And I actually find that a very dissatisfactory answer because, again, the amount of memories or like history behind these characters that we experience is dictated by the creators. It's got nothing to do with the laws of the universe. Decim's like incomplete memory is a function of the text. It could be any way it wanted to be to fulfill the story. And this is where, of course, I'm getting to all this meta shit and all that. And this is why I find this a bit like head scratchy. But that's why I just think to myself, like, I'm not saying I don't have an opinion on the characters in the show. And I'm not saying it doesn't make me think about them. And again, I mentioned that, you can't watch this show without judging on them. But a lot of it feels very thin. And I think for the shows like talk about like the complexity of human nature, the fact that we get scant little detail as we do is a problem. With one exception, or rather two. The first exception, of course, being Yosuke. That's fair enough. I think his is well fleshed out enough, in my opinion. This other one being the couple in episode 3, where I actually will argue later that it goes too far in giving too much detail, but I'll get to that when we get to it. But yeah, that's the thing. Like, I like the idea, and I'm speaking, by the way, as an atheist here, so I have a bias on thinking, hey, this criticizing omnipotence and the idea that there is an all-seeing consciousness that can judge us accurately and equitably, because that's not the case. But in turn, we don't have more privileged information generally speaking, to come to a dissimilar agreement based on enhanced info that I think would also then in turn like bolster that point the show is trying to make, if you follow what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But conversely, and this is where I say like about me being a fence sitter, how do you get more time in to do that? I said, I think, funnily enough, this about maybe Decadence. Like, there's only so much runtime one has to fit these things in. And you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Then that's why I feel like, yeah. I don't know. I'll pass the book to you now, Doc.
Okay. So, do I think that the death game system is being presented as potentially suspect, broken, or unfair, and how? What interestingly enough, I mean, this leads to like a whole mess of things that I wrote down that I wanted to talk about. And the first one is that this show is about a system that like the character drama is like a good hook, right? But like it seems like what's really kind of going on and what we're going to dig more deeply into as the show goes forward, what the show hopefully will talk about more is this system of eternal kind of praise and blame and moral consequences. And you mentioned Decadence. That is another show that is deeply about systems, just kind of economic systems, more than like religious system or something like that, or some kind of metaphysical, kind of moral system. And, Decadence ended up being about breaking that system and breaking out of it, and why that was a good thing that we should do. And I'm curious if the show will do the same thing, since it, precedes Decadence by like 5 years. Will this go to the same lengths? How has Yuzuru Tachikawa's thought developed? Or will it be the same? Like, will it be kind of a consistent thing, like presents system and then shows how it's bad and then we should break it, right? I think that's an interesting thing to think about, like in the context of his work. But so does the show it's potentially suspect, broken, or unfair? Well, I think it does. I want to say something here, I think, about how I think the system is different from St. Peter judging you at the pearly gates, as you brought up, right? Like the kind of Christian idea that like when you die, your soul will go before the gates of heaven or before God or whatever, and all the deeds that you've done in your life will be weighed, good and bad, like, and how that balances out determines the fate of your immortal soul. And then that kind of changes over time to where, like, people say like, well, ultimately it matters like what your beliefs are, if you have the correct beliefs, rather than like just your deeds. But that's, I think for the purposes of what we're talking about, it's more useful to compare Death Prey to what you are talking about and what I just outlined, that whole idea of weighing good deeds. I think this is not at all what's going on. I think then, if that was what was going on, why have the game? I think what's going on is this game exists to put the two people in it into the most tense, stressful kind of blender, a trash compactor possible, to see that when the chips are the most down, when they're facing the dire circumstances, really personal ones, how do they respond? What choice do they make? And that's kind of how their true self is shown. And then you might say like, well, what's the deal with all the rest of the context? Well, I think the idea is like, not that these people are being judged based on what they've done in their life, but it's almost like their life, you're shown everything in their life to
Yeah.
see how they've prepared for this moment, like what kind of person they really are when faced with like these sort of really significant choices. And like almost like, you know, your life isn't going to be weighed, but it's going to like exist as this thing to prepare you for the afterlife.
Yeah.
And like, go ahead.
I think I get where you're coming from, because that would explain also the stripping away of their memories, because when you pare them down to just their souls, and I think this maybe the show is taking the position that the soul in this case is the moral compass. It's not a question of necessarily like the cumulative knowledge and experience and wisdom that you have that dictates your morality and your ethics, but this otherwise, like, you know, like spiritual aspect that is
Right.
put in your body. And like, so basically it's, I'm not sure I feel about this as someone who is ultimately very much in favor of free will, but I think it's one of those things where I suppose you're damned like from birth basically, in that case.
So I don't think that that's what's going on, because
Okay.
I think because then, like, if that were the case, like, all the backstory wouldn't necessarily matter. But the backstory, like, kind of the choices they make in life and how they respond and how they grow and live, that, like, your soul is malleable. Like, it's shaped by that. And, there's like a loop. Like, it's shaped by that stuff, but then it also, through exercise of the will, like, the person can do things and shape their circumstances. And that's why, like, you know, I think that there would be, if a system like this were like real, people who were forced basically to do shitty things, like the characters of Phantom, let's say.
Oh boy.
That were like forced into this life of awful servitude where they basically their lives were under threat if they didn't carry out these horrible acts. And in a case like this, all that stuff is stripped away and you're not like being forced to act any kind of way. Like you're just sort of making a decision based on like who you are. Now, I guess it will be your responsibility in life, if you led that kind of life, not to let that life warp and twist like the goodness that was in your heart. I mean, and fucking good luck with that, I guess. but yeah, so that's what I think is happening here. Now, this is not me saying that the show shows that the system is like a fair system, because like it really kind of brings down deity and humanizes it. And, you know, all these judgments are being carried out by essentially human beings, certainly fallible beings like us, right? And like, maybe that's just because, you know, I don't know, maybe it's for entertainment's sake, right? Or maybe it's because that people behind the show believe that, well, the only way to think about the spiritual world is, the only way we can think about it is in anthropomorphic terms. Like, because that's all we have. That's the only kind of language we have. We don't really have concepts to describe something that transcends humanity and human experience. And so, like, when you do humanize it, like, you absolutely see, oh my God, like, human beings or something like human beings, even if they have more power, right? Even if they have access to excerpts of your life that are particularly relevant, are going to make mistakes. They're going to either judge too harshly, or they're going to like let you off the hook, you know, because they don't have like omnipotence. And in a way, a system like that, like thinking about a system like this, and if it were real, is really disquieting, because, you know, like religious folks sort of bank on this idea that like, well, life can be really shitty and unfair, but like once we get to the next world, everything will be as it should be. Like
Everything's a test.
the wheat will be sorted from the chaff, the sheep from the goats. Like everyone will get their just desserts. Like me, the good boy, will get, even if everyone didn't see it, like I will get what I deserve because life was shitty to me and I was shit on so much. And these other people who were bad and clearly didn't deserve all the good things they got will be brought down to the level they need to be. That that kind of thing. And this show is putting something out there that's definitely not that is subject to all the same kinds of error. Because it appears to be, I don't know, like it's a very human sort of system. And maybe this is the only way we can think about systems. Or maybe like Tachikawa is very much like, systems are always going to be flawed, like in Decadence, like there's always going to be these holes, these things, these imperfections.
Or exploitive that matter. That being said, I feel like I would be dissatisfied if it turned out, joke as I might, that where they're really sending these souls is to like, some sort of cosmic horror that's just eating them for lunch. Like Dairy Lee Dunkers.
I would not like that, I don't think.
No, I think that this works better if you take it on the fact that this system is intended to do right, to be just, to be fair, but is ultimately not. I think that works better for the material and works better for the themes and implications.
I agree.
That's my feeling on that.
Yeah. So my answer, the short answer is yes. I think that it is being shown to be, I guess, shown to be unfair. I don't know. I'm kind of having to think about it. Like maybe, Shadon, if everything is subject to human error, and if every judgment is made based on a limited perspective, then is it right to expect some kind of fairness out of a system? I don't know. I mean, maybe it's not. Maybe it's no more unfair. If everything's the same level of unfair, then is nothing unfair, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say.
The thing is, though, like we assume that religious like afterlives are from a higher order and therefore defined as being free of that kind of war.
Sure.
Although I'm sure Christian scholars could debate that, given that, of course, the very idea of sin comes from, the fallen angel who Gabriel. Mm-hmm. Was it Gabriel? I know it's Satan, but like what was the name before? That's Lucifer. The one. I don't know why I said I should have known that, but you know what I mean. Like, and obviously, like if Lucifer was God's creation and how was that flawed, and you can go on and discuss that all day if you want, but It's Sunday and I ain't in school, so I'm skipping it. But I think that's the way I otherwise see this kind of thing, where because this is presented as being a higher order thing, a spiritual thing, even if it is goofy like arcade game nonsense at one point, there is an implication that we understand as people who know about religion and otherwise consume fiction about it, or maybe even are religious ourselves, that the inherent human flaws that we suffer from and have to overcome to be accepted into that place, our baseline understanding is that doesn't happen there.
And yet
that does not.
It does in this show.
And yes, it does, and that's intriguing, and that's worth discussion. I like that. Especially if you're an ultra cynic like me and you think that, of course, given the Bible was rewritten many times by men, how can in turn, that truly be the scripture of God that then says how to live your life, But again, I'm not going to be in school on Sunday. You can go after that debate with someone else. Sorry. But yeah, I'm going to sleep probably on my original thought, though, about how much detail the show chooses to give, because while I do see where you're coming from about the idea of paring it away to test one's character devoid of it, there's no denying that on a meta level, the backstories are important to the show from an entertainment level. Like, they are the engaging elements of it, of the characters.
Totally.
Because in theory, you could do the show where that we never learn any of that. We get hints of it from their behavior, but we never see, like, this the memories. Like, you have to again think of what I've said before about the idea of there being two audiences in shows, one of which being the characters in Simon Us too. And Decim is one audience. He is the diegetic audience in this show. And by extension, I think Chiyuki as well, because I think she gets access to the memories, if I'm not mistaken. And we could probably lump in all the other other staff.
I don't know if she does, because she's being surprised all the time, right? Because like Decim is whispering to her, that's not really this one girl, it's another girl who got plastic surgery to look like her, and she's like, oh my god, you know what I mean? So like I had to think a minute, like, but I guess she doesn't have the same kind of sight.
Whatever you boil down to, at least Decim definitely counts in that category. But we in turn are also the audience, and we kind of like are sometimes simpatico with him, where we see the same things he sees in the moment those memories come pouring out. But then, of course, one has to then know that why we're getting those memories and why he's getting them are different things. The show could, in theory, function without ever seeing any of the flashbacks. And that's, again, where my point comes in that I wonder, and I'm going to sleep on it, I'm going to not let this factor into my appraisal of the show thus far, whether or not, like, the limited detail we do get for these characters' backstories makes it work. I mean, by contrast, just to compare here, let's take what was her name again? It was the counterpart to Yosuke in episode 4.
Oh,
I'm gonna
the TV hostess. I can't remember her name. I had the character list up and I don't anymore. No,
I don't. Oh, it's Misaki. There we go. I had it on my notes. I just forgot to look. Like Misaki, neglectful mother and all that. The one comparison point I can think of anime that we've talked about this year is from Wonder Egg with Rika's mother. But although they principally have similar backgrounds, even though one, of course, is not a TV star, but nonetheless the core idea of neglectful parent is there, they serve different functions. And it speaks to where Death Parade operates differently for something like Wonder Egg, because Rika's mother in that show conceptually exists for Rika's sake narratively. Irony being, of course, she doesn't do jack shit for in the show properly, but you get my point. She is a character who exists to drive Rika's character growth and serve as like the source of her conflicts. Whereas Misaki is solely self-contained.
Yeah. And she turns it around over the course of her life, So
but the thing is, though, like, because Rika is the source, like the focus and the intent, and she's a long-standing character, that's why even though Rika's mother appears once, really, in any substantial detail, it doesn't matter that we then don't really see her again. Whereas Misaki, like, we get the like ideas of like how she's been abused at one point, but it's very, very brief. And I wonder if that limits the effectiveness of it overall. But again, I feel bad for saying this, because how do you do it differently in this show's expected format? Because it is a one-shot episode per couple that come in.
Well, let me argue the counterpoint and say that I think that the show baits us to judge these characters, but because the results at the end of the episode are always so different from our initial conceptions, like, it's really trying to drive home the point of like, we are in no position to judge these people. Human beings aren't, because we don't know everything. And even if the people here that do know more than we do, like, fuck up. And so I think that it's okay that we don't get like the whole scope of their lives, because we're not like necessarily meant to judge them. Like, we get these very particular snippets that inform us of why the characters are behaving the way they are and why they're making the decisions they're making in the game. These really significant pieces.
Yeah, I half agree and I half don't. And the reason I half don't is because of two different reasons. One of which, firstly, is Misaki. She does something in episode 3, which I'm going to address separately in our upcoming question, that caught me completely by surprise. Sorry, episode 4. Yeah, you're right. That caught me completely by surprise what happened. It was shocking, but it was shocking in a way that I actually found a bit out of like whack with the show, to be quite honest.
Really?
And
interesting.
I'll get to that when we discuss it. And then, of course, conversely, we have the issue I mentioned with episode 3 and the fact that we learned too much about one character. And I think the story would have been better had we had less detail, but that's a separate point. Um, it's a difficult balancing act, and I admit that my criticism here is probably not entirely fair because the show is doing exactly what it is setting out to do. And how do you fit in more context on each episode for the couples of there in the limited time span you have? Maybe if like my criticism is legit, maybe it's just more a failure of over ambition. And if that's true, then all I'll say is, well, at least they tried. And again, I'm not saying that what we get is bad, by no means at all, with the exception of the episode 4 thing, which we'll come to in a moment. All of the stories work. They do their job. They are engaging, but I just think, could they have been more so? Could we have learned more?
Well, like to what end? Like what do you think would be added to like the game and like the judgment and all that good stuff? Like what would more backstory give us?
Well, episodes 1 and 2 show that there is a level of complexity that needs to be reached when coming to these judgments, where after the facts of episode 1, there is the question of whether or not we got it wrong. And granted, this would maybe perhaps undo the entire thesis of episode 1, where Deshou is fallible. But my argument then would be that if you're then trying to put the point out there that you need as much information as you can possibly get your hands on to come to a conclusion, but then the show doesn't give us as much information as, again, speaking strictly for myself, that I would like, that seems a bit unfortunate. I mean, again, it's the thing that I mentioned, where the reason that we don't get to see all of the memories that we might otherwise want to, beyond the time constraint, even though it's still factored into it, is not anything to do with Decim's like written power or lack of power in getting the whole picture, but it's because the writers have chosen it to be that way. So,
but I don't think. Well, that's the thing, is I don't think us coming to the right decision is like the point of what's going on. You know what I mean?
No, it's not. It's an inevitable consequence of the way the show is structured. I mean, again, like I mentioned before, I defy you to come to the end of episode 4 and not have some opinion on Yosuke, for example, or by consequence Misaki. It's an unavoidable facet of that. And I think that whenever like a show has something like this, where you're playing a kind of mystery thing on who these characters are and you're piecing it together as you go along, and the end question is the judgment, I think that it silently invites you to do the same.
Yeah, but it does, but then it shows you shouldn't do that. Because, yeah, but you know what I mean? And like, I think that no matter how much more context we got, I would still feel empathy for all 6 of these characters. I would still feel like none of you should be evaporated into the void. All of you should have a chance to be reincarnated. Mm-hmm. Like, because you've all suffered, and you've all, like, there's been context and reasons to the decisions you've made in your life. And I don't think that you're these horrible people. And it sucks that, like, you now have to be, you now have one of you, perhaps, or both of you have to be like you don't get to exist anymore. Your soul is extinguished, which is like awful to think about. And so I just don't see, again, the audience being able to come to the right decision as the point, when, especially because the show, I mean, I think we agree that saying like these like systems are inherently unfair and can be exploited, and like there's human error involved, and there's not really a way to get it right. That's what I would say. I know that you might think that that's unsatisfying. I think you alluded to before, but like,
yeah, I did.
I just don't. I don't think more context, again, would like shed. You could never have enough context to say, I think, hey, character X, you get to go to heaven or hell. No amount of context, in my opinion, would give me like what I felt was like enough information to be like, yep, damn that guy. I'm always going to be like, yep, pro heaven, Pro reincarnation.
Pro reincarnation. Fair enough. Fair enough. We'll agree to disagree on that. I mean, I'm just still going to let my thoughts settle on that, to be quite honest, because it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. Ironically enough, thing. There's the paradox for you. All right. Shall we move on to the next question, then, Doc?
Oh yeah, let's do it.
All right. So this is the one that's going to lead into my talk about this particular scene in episode 4.
Okay.
This again being from Riku. What do you think about the presentation of the female characters who have faced judgment so far? All of whom are duplicitous but desperate victims in different ways. Oh dear. This is where I talk about the slight vein of misogyny that goes through this.
I think duplicitous is a strong word, especially to characterize Machiko.
Well,
I mean, that's like such a character claim. Like, it just seems such a broad, like, she made a mistake in her life and had like a, one-time thing with another dude. Like, I don't feel like that makes you a duplicitous person. Well, as hurtful as I would be hurt if I was on the other end of that, of course. But like, when we're not the husband, we're, as you said, invited to take the role of like subjective, like looking at someone's life, and like, I would not call her duplicitous. Yeah, I don't know if I would use that word necessarily.
Well, that's just to translate from Riku's word there. I think what they mean by that is more not necessarily as strong as that, but more that they are. How to put this? Is it what's the thing for lying again? Well, actually, that's no better actually, because that's equally strong. That's a syndrome. Then ignore me on that.
Yeah.
Basically, that they are presented consistently as people who present
they deceive the other people.
They are deceptive. Yes. All right. So this is where I get to talk about what I think is the mild, and I stress the word mild here. Mm-hmm. This is not me like saying this is full blown like slavery apology or bullshit, where there is full blown misogyny. But there is a vein of it in this, I think. And I think it boils down to a couple of things I can talk about with each of the 3 female characters we've met thus far who are judged. We've already talked about Machiko, so I'm not going to belabor that point anymore. Although I will come back to addressing her in a broader sense later. The second of the 2 characters is Mai. And to give context, her and her male friend, whose name I've forgotten, they actually were childhood friends, and she had a crush on him, but he had a crush on someone else. And that someone else left his life. This is long before they died, of course. She works at a bowling alley. And then he tried to talk to her on a bus home, and there was a crash, and that's what killed them both simultaneously. But the guys who he's with, and this is again many years after he's seen Cena, say, hey, isn't she that person who did this and that? At least that's how the episode initially presents it. What she's actually done is ambiguous, and this will lead into something else I'll talk about separately. But what we then find out is she actually had plastic surgery to look more like the person that he had a crush on.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go in pretty hard on this because, for one, how in the flying blue fuck do you get plastic surgery to look like someone when you last saw them when they were 10 and you're now working at a bowling alley? That's a plot hole of itself. But the more damning thing about this is how it paints her character. Because if I'm going to be quite honest, if I had someone do that because they wanted to look like someone I was into as a child in the way children are, like close friends are, I think that's fucking creepy.
You could Google them. You could Google them or whatever. That's still Google would be.
That's still creepy though.
Oh, it is creepy. I just was thinking about the mechanics of how you do it, because you just moved away. I don't think she died, so you could maybe it's like, oh, I found this girl on Facebook, and this is what she looks like now. So now I'm going to get the surgery. So, I think logically possible, but still very creepy. No, sure.
Yeah, and that's kind of ruins episode 3 a little bit for me. I really like the intent and the idea, and I'm going to go into it in more detail because this is more general about the women. But again, this is not good. This is problematic for her character, and it's just completely hand-waved away and glossed over. And I think it's a legitimate flaw in the show, of which there are very few, I admit. But I don't think one can get away from the fact that this like relationship, even if it is just in like the twilight hours of their lives, like the twilight hours of their lives for that matter,
Right.
is built on this ground. Like maybe it doesn't matter because they're dead. Maybe that's why he's just like may bygones be bygones. Like that's some fucked up shit, but whatever. I don't know. And funnily enough, I now also just had the thoughts occur to me that it would have been neat if they did something visual with that, where she looks like her like adult self if she'd never gone through the surgery. After that revelation, they could have done
But they
something
do.
with that.
They do. Like
Oh?
if you look,
Then
if
I
you
must
look
have
in the, well, if you look in the elevator, like they
Oh.
show half of her face is freckled and has a droopy eyelid,
I
and the other
missed
half
that.
is like the post surgery face.
You're right. I was wondering what that was, but I didn't put two and two together. Okay, that's good. That's a good thing. I'll allow that. But yeah, this is creepy as fuck. Don't get me wrong. And then finally, I need to talk about Misaki, and this is the thing that kind of really threw me, and where I was asking for more context. She starts like taking Yosuke's head and bashing it against the arcade cabinet they're
Mhm.
playing in, and it's shockingly violent to the point where I
Mhm.
thought, what the fuck? Because the context we have of her is that she has been abused, and indeed she is murdered by one of her production assistants in a fit of
Mhm.
rage. But when did we ever see her doing that to someone else or something like equivalent where she was that violent? She just seemed to be bitchy more than anything. It went way too far. It went way too far, in my opinion. Um, that moment of violence. And you could argue that she was like desperate to not like, lose because she was and all that, and maybe all methods were justified. But I don't know, there's something about that that was just like, whoa, this is too much. This is way too much where it's the point she's bashing a kid's head into an arcade cabinet to kill him. It's not even a question of like doing something like strangling him or something. Like this is like out and out like brutal violence. This is something I expect to see in Clockwork Orange. This is coming from
Yeah.
from an actress in a TV show. What the fuck? And
This
so
is why there's an uncut version on Funimation. You could pick, do you want to watch the uncut version or the simulcast version?
I did not realize that, and that explains that then. And look, I'm not a prude. I think if you listen to the podcast right now and take me on good faith, you'll agree that I'm not that.
Yeah.
There are times when I'm totally down for ultra violence. This went too far. This went too far, in my opinion. And
That's interesting.
and this all ties together with all three of these women, where I feel that beyond that, they also tend to be framed as their life problems being around either motherhood or relationships or adultery. And I'm not entirely sure if I like the idea of that gendered like through line there.
That's a good point. Like, I think, yeah, I think that's a very valid thing to bring up, actually.
Yeah. And this is again where I mentioned about more concepts, because if for example, like just to fan wank hypotheticalize here, if there was a scene in which like say, and I hate to imagine this because it's grim as it is, but like where someone had done something similar to her, like as part of the abuse that she suffered, like if we saw someone smash her head against the sea, by the way, not advocating for this at all, if you know what I mean.
Go
I'm
watch some
talking
exploitation films.
I'm
You want
talking
that?
narratively, but then you
Yeah.
can see how that then bleeds through to her behavior, where it has like affected her. That would have made more sense to me. But yeah, I think there is, as I say, a thin vein of misogyny written into the text about the women here, because it seems very focused on their gender and gendered roles assigned to them rather than actual experience. And the funny thing is, I say that though, but the Misaki actually has a really neat thing that she does at the start of the episode she's in, which I'll discuss separately, which shows that they don't necessarily write about gender all the time as being the source of their woes, but much of it seems to be derived from that. And I will also note one final thing before I pass the book on to Doc here, which is I am speaking from the perspective of someone who's seen episodes 1 through 4 only. The show could potentially change over time to where it becomes more even on that. And I will also equally say that the men seem to also kind of have that similar thing as well, if I must be quite honest, where they're portrayed very much in a gendered sense, also about their behavior. We've got like the abusive like husband who's literally ugly and paranoid. Like he thinks that she's a harlot. That he has no trust in her whatsoever. That's a very stereotypical man thing to do in texts like this. Where like he doesn't trust her. that
Yeah,
kind of thing.
I think the other two guys are not kind of the same way, but I totally see where you're coming from with the first
Yeah,
character. Yeah, I think is Yosuke, right? Who's I feel like he's
yeah.
sort of like the problem. I wouldn't see that as like a gendered thing.
No,
And then
let me
the
just also just step in there and say with Yosuke that um him being a guy, I'm not going to say that that kind of thing that happens to him doesn't happen to women, but let's be clear here, like suicide is more prevalent in men. And I've last time I checked, that was definitely the case in Japan, and particularly with his clique, where he seems to be either borderline or actual hikikomori.
right, yeah.
So I'm not saying that, like there isn't a time and place for that, but I don't know. The application with the women in particular just seems a bit too cliched, obvious, and slightly misogynistic, as I say.
Well, I
But
mean, I think
anyway,
you could tell that the show is written by a Japanese man.
yep,
Is what I would say. Like
yep,
it definitely is, and I'm not saying that he's a misogynist or that there was a lot of ill intent there, but I just like you were saying like just kind of the starting premises and the framing of everything around you know relationship to your man or your kids, like it feels just like it was a blind spot. And like you said, maybe there will be improvements going forward in this
yeah.
area because we've only seen a third of the show. So we'll see. Hopefully that's the case. I think, I would again not call Machiko duplicitous. I feel like the show is not like sort of condemning I wasn't thinking after this first episode like, man, the show is condemning like all of woman and womanhood as like inherently liars or whatever, like and I think that unsurprisingly, I think, well, I'll disagree with you on Misaki, especially given the whole context of her narrative. Now, a couple of points I think would for my case. I think that like the violent act she commits, if you understand it as like it's almost as if she wasn't in control, because when she finishes, she didn't realize what she was doing because she was like, Yosuke, oh my god, what happened to you? What did I do that? You know what I mean? It's like she had like a break. When she found out that she was dead and she was going to be separated from her children, thing that she had kind of come around on in her life to caring about and really embracing being a mom and loving it, like she lost it and lashed out and clearly blacked out and didn't realize what she was doing. And so the motherhood thing is a part of it. Now, again,
Oh yeah,
see our criticism, but like, I think it's not unreasonable for, well, maybe it is unreasonable on their part, but like, it doesn't strike me as beyond the bounds of sense that you would have a parent that when being informed that they're going to be separated from their kid, if they don't overcome this one obstacle, they're going to lash out, like that something in them is going to like something feral, almost instinctual, is going to come out. I mean, I would react in a strong manner to being given such a declaration. And I think the fact that we see her as physically abused, like throughout her life, makes it to me, again, plausible that she would have these like episodes where like that, the toll of all that she'd otherwise been repressing would violently come out for a brief period of time. Again, it strikes me as all plausible. I'm not saying that it was necessarily like set up in the best way, but I think that the fact that it is shocking is what for me helps kind of make it work. And I think it's shocking initially, and then we see more of her narrative, if I'm getting the order correctly here, and then we think like, at least I thought like, okay, given this more information, it seems like more of a sensible thing that this happened. More
Yeah,
of a,
yeah.
and like, yeah, I think that again the sudden out of nowhere nature of it really adds to the like effectiveness of that scene. And so that's what I would say about that. The second girl, Mai, I believe was like, I mean, I can't argue with you that it's like fucked up that she would do that. I just feel really sorry for her. I mean, I just at bottom, I just feel really awful for her. So
if I may respond to just some of your points there, like I'll just clarify what my issue is with the scene with Misaki is not that she lashed out, but rather just the extreme violence of it. If she had done something else to Yosuke, I'd have been more cool with that. I know that makes me sound terrible saying that out loud, but you get my point. Like slamming his head repeatedly into the arcade cabinet so it breaks is a bit too much. It's the specific acts, not the lashing out itself, that I have an issue with. I think that goes too far. But I do appreciate its intent because, for one thing, we can see that maybe by implication from that act that she has similarly also done so with her children, even though she does love them, and maybe that's like strained their relationship. Because abuse, unfortunately, is cyclic. It wouldn't surprise me, if that happened. I mean, I'll attest to that with my own parents, my mother specifically, and this is where my own personal experience bleeds into this, funnily enough. But anyway. So there's that. And then also, of course, what we see here is, in theory, two people who should have every reason to connect with each other, in that she wants a better relationship with her children and he wants a better relationship with her mother. And yet we see the worst possible outcome. I'll say, and the fact that Yosuke doesn't resist, I think, in some ways, actually really chilling because he seems to want to die all over again. If that's even possible in this, dimension, universe, or whatever. So all of that stuff works, but just the actual act itself goes too far. It's like having a bloodless PG-12 film, for example, and then suddenly, next thing you know, someone gets fucking their head split in half. Maybe the degree to that of that comparison is too much, but the intent is more, you have a set tone for the conflict here, and you have a set tone for how violent it can be. And then you suddenly go to that point, the act itself is too extreme. But the intent behind it, I get entirely.
And there was violence before, people bleeding from the mouth and,
that was from the darts, though.
Shot from, I know. I'm just saying, it's not a PG show. There's some blood and some, implied kind of stabbing and things like that. But no, it definitely ratchets up the level. I just think yeah, I mean, I guess if you're just talking about violence, sure. I think the subject matter and everything in the show, it's hey, this is heavy shit for people who want to indulge in a show about heavy shit. So I don't it did not bother me, but hey, I mean, it's a really violent scene. So yeah, if it was if it bothered people, sure, I get it. Who am I? Who am I to argue?
The other thing as well, let's talk about Mai for a moment. This is the point where I actually now say they gave too much information, funnily enough, but despite the otherwise abridged nature that we get of all of the various, individuals, because that's by virtue of the runtime and the format. But what I originally thought was going to happen, my thought processes was happening was when they say to her male friend, whose name I've forgotten, Mr. Bowling Guy, Mr. Turkey, Mr. Strikeout, whatever you want to call him, when they say to him, oh, she is she's done things, that sort of stuff. My reaction to that was, we're never going to find out what that is. And I'm okay with it. Because then the message is, whatever these rumors are, wherever this has been done, he's inviting himself to judge on that. And he was going to ask her about it and then come to his own conclusion. But then we get the whole plastic surgery thing, and I'm well, we've got a concrete answer now as to what she has done, and it's fucked up. I don't like it. it would have been better if we never found out all, because that ambiguity would have then served the story. It would have served the fact that, hey, I met this person again, and hey, people say things about her. They may or may not be true, but I'm going to find out. I'm not going to just let that be, the thing that I judge her on. And that in turn would then tie into the whole Decim judging people thing that's going on here. But that's where they give too much detail, and I think like, ugh. Like, even if they'd done something less creepy than the fact that she got plastic surgery to look like someone else to try and hook up with this dude, I still think that gives too much info. So yeah, it is a shame though. I hope that the female characters do, as I say, become more diverse in what is ultimately covered. But we'll see soon enough. And since Doc has just taken a moment to nip away, presumably he's gone to, fight off a mountain lion that's just wandered onto, his workplace terrace, I'm going to nip away very briefly as well. I'm hoping I can be back before him. You can time it there at home, folks. I'm going to get myself a drink. Back in a second.
Shadon has also left. I was not aware of this.
Damn it, I was hoping to be back before you returned.
you just, man, I would have I should have just thrown us to a break.
Fine, I have returned with Elvis juice made from real Elvis.
Delicious.
Tastes like the 1950s all over again.
Blue suede shoe flavored.
Like cigarettes.
Yes. All right.
Really bad cigarettes at that. Okay, we have two more Patreon questions to go.
Is it the juice of like skinny movie star Elvis, or is it the juice of like chubby the king Elvis?
Well, it doesn't taste like nasty beef burger, so I'm assuming it's the former.
Okay. Yeah. That's what I would prefer.
Yeah, that I hope so too. All right, so next Patreon questions. Thank you very much, by the way, Riku, for those. Lots to say. This is the thing, like they were covering a lot of talking points by going through these anyway, but that's great because there's always a lot to discuss. So next two, these come from Johnny Rackham. In the Death Billiards pilot, Decim chooses not to tell which person went where, allowing the viewer to try and think for themselves. However, during the actual series, they make clear which destinations the two masks represent. As an anime original, do you think the author already had that in mind when Death Billiards was made, allowing us to go back and find the answer? Or do you feel this info was added later specifically for the series? Okay, so I'll answer right off the bat and say I think they added this in, partly again because this ties into the whole flawed system thing. If we don't know what the outcomes of the judgments are, we can't then in turn make an opinion ourselves. Right. On the flaws of the system. You can't say a system is flawed now if you have no idea what the outcome is. But I would also then argue in turn that there are times when I didn't even clock, for example, and this is just perhaps my poor attention span, that the couple in episode 3, Mai and Mr. Turkey, or whatever his name is, they actually both get reincarnated. That's something I noticed on the Wikipedia episode summary. And I like that, by the way, because it suggests, for one, that the system is flexible. It's not a duality thing where, one person wins.
One must stay and one must go, or whatever. Yeah. It's like, I think like the white mask, like smiling is like, and kind of like squinting is you get reincarnated, and the sort of, is it red maybe or brown? Like this sort of like laughing demon looking face is like you're voided. Which means I think that Misaki was voided, which I feel a little conflicted about.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think that's an adjustment they made for the show to accommodate this theme. It makes sense as a self-contained pilot episode, if you want to call it that, for Death Billiards, because the premise in Death Billiards was more you play a game to decide if you get reincarnated or not, and ultimately the outcome is not relevant. But then in a longer series, of course, we have to start considering the impacts of that. So yeah, I would say that I think this was added specifically so it could facilitate the discussion that we're having over the idea of the system being flawed or not, because we need to know the outcomes in order to determine that, much as you need to know who win, who scores what in a game to determine the winner.
I agree. Yeah, I nothing more to add except I think that seems sensible to me.
Cool. All right. Next question from Johnny Rackham then is: if you arrived at Decim's bar, what game would you most dread having to play, and how might the bar's twists on these games make it even worse? Ooh. Oh, okay. I'm gonna
We're only
say,
shown 3 games so far, right? I wish we knew what
yeah.
all 9 of the games were. But what do we got? We got darts, bowling, and the
pool.
arcade, the fighting game. Oh, and billiards. Right,
Yeah.
we can count billiards.
I think for the sake of answering this question, we'll have to limit the scope of the games to pub, club, bar games, etc.
Oh, you don't want to go. You don't want to just pick from the 4 that they give us.
I mean, we could very well have like all sorts of pub club games come up. I'm gonna say foosball.
Okay, that's the one you least like to play.
And that's because of the twists on it. I think for one, I'm not very good at it. For two, I get the feeling that like if the ball like went down there, like you'd have it like it feel like it was going down your gullet, like when they score, and it would be really gross. Because part of the show's concepts, of course, is when you play these games, there's a body horror element. Like on the darts thing, like they have like the various body parts of each of them, and if you land a hit on there, that's like you're actually literally hit by a dart.
Oh, yeah.
So the bullseye, of course, being the heart, that happens at one point in the episode. It's like, oh, my angina. I'm not doing it justice, to be fair, but you get my point.
The fact that poor Machiko is hit in the belly when it's like she's only like she hasn't quite realized she's dead, so she thinks I still have a baby in there. Like, oh, it's like
does that by the way,
grisly.
Can I just ask a philosophical question of you, here? Does that mean that by implication the show asserts that life begins at birth and not conception, given there's not 3 of them there? Or like there's no discussion from Decim that it's like a trio?
It seems to be, right? Yeah.
It ultimately doesn't matter for the show itself, but I just thought that was curious that like no one mentions the baby, really. When I say that, I mean in terms of like what it means now that like dead and all that.
The soul. Like, there is no third soul, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Although I will be coming back to the concepts of the baby and what it means for their relationship in a bit. But yeah, anyway. All right. So what's your game then, Doc? Like, what game do you want to avoid?
Well, I'll tell you what game I would want to play is the bowling. I think I'm a pretty decent bowler. Like,
I would have bowling. I would have anyone at billiards. I can play billiards pretty decently.
I suck at that. I can't decide if I would suck at billiards or darts worse. I'm pretty bad at both.
Darts, I'm dreadful at.
I might want to avoid dart. I mean, like, and the whole idea of like the stabbing business, just.
No. I take back foosball, fruit machine, gambling machine, because that's completely random, and you'll have it like just cheat you out of winning, and then like that's your unfairness right there, because Decim does speak of that at one point. And you'll end up like it'll be all the body parts on the reels, won't it? So you get what you think is like the equivalent of the 777 for the jackpot or wherever it is, and in reality, it's like your kidney. You're like,
yes,
or the thing starts spilling kidneys out, and you're just grossed out or something.
Oh,
like you can do some fucked up shit with a fruit machine.
I mean, that has to come up. I feel like there must be a fruit machine in
who's ready for roulette where you're throwing like your eyeballs on there or something.
It can't the thing is, like, I feel like it can't become Death Casino. Like, it can't be like this is just kaiji in the afterworld. They have to like steer away from like poker or like the craps or the dumb wheel.
It's funny that you mentioned kaiji, because I will be coming back to kaiji later. And Kakegurui as well, actually, which I've just found out on the news has been licensed actually for home release. Isn't that nice?
Finally, who's picking it up?
Where did I see this? I think it might be Sentai. Yeah, yep, licensed by Sentai.
Nice.
They,
I like that show quite a
they,
bit in all of its
I,
forms.
I have watched the first season, and I'll be coming back to that later. But anyway, so yeah, Fruit Machine will fuck you up real bad.
Yes. Yes.
It'll
Yeah,
do the shit that Fruit Machines do, where you land like you get on the feature trail, and there's always the question marks. And you're like, I don't want to land on a question mark, but you then land on it, and it gives you the random selection. There's always the game. There's like the game over thing. You're like, I'm not going to get the game over. And you hit the button, and it always gives you the fucking game over because those machines are rigged as fuck.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I think
It'll
I've made
screw
my
you
choice.
over.
I would. I think I could get lucky enough in darts, but I would not want to play billiards because skill is involved, and I'm just fucking terrible at pool. Just the worst. So
Right. Well, if I'm not mistaken, then that brings us to the end of our Patreon questions. So thank you very much to Navy, Riku, and Johnny Rackham for your questions there. A lot of good discussion, a lot of fun discussion as well, which is worthwhile. Now I suppose is the time to move on to talking points. And I do have a couple to make. Do you have any to make as well, Doc? Do you have a couple of extra things to say?
I have one that is broader in scope. Are yours very specific?
I have some specific ones, so I suppose I can just get one of those real quick out of the way.
Okay.
So let me talk about the thing I really liked about Misaki as a character, which is she arrives in the bar and assumes she's immediately in a TV show, which, I mean, dead camera, we can call it? I don't know. But anyway. And what I like about that is the fact she immediately goes into that line of thinking, because it tells us so much about her character and how much she lives a life of performance, of performing obviously for camera, but also like presenting to other people. I mean, if you've been abused like she has, you've got to obviously hide that. Like, it's a deeply informative moment that, while providing comedy, also works to inform us about the character. And it really, with hindsight at the end of the episode, like fleshes her out really well as an opening statement. Because otherwise, like, Yosuke is right, like, we don't remember anything. Like, what kind of whack out, like, fucked up TV show would, like, dump us somewhere with no memory? Like, that's a bit fucked up, isn't it? But she's like, no, it's just the cameras. Don't worry, son. Don't worry, honey. You know, it's fine.
Yeah. Operating off instinct, like initially, you know, when they are not even thinking about their lack of memory. She's just like, well, we're clearly on some kind of stunt show, so let's strategize here, which is very good.
Yeah, the time that she needs to be the most real is the time that she's actually the least, unfortunately, at least in that initial moment. So that was a nice little detail that I really liked. Say, gay comedy, but you get your character building all in one. It's a twofer. It's pretty good.
Very cool. Well, do you have another specific one?
I have a few more. So let's also just talk about the scene between Takashi and Machiko when they're having their massive fucking back and forth row reconciliation tango, because it seems to like the fucking sine wave of we're cool to we're not, and that is intense. But there's a lot we learn in those moments that really shows like how this is a house built on sand. Like, there's a moment when he's hugging her, he says, "Finally, I'm going to be a father." But like, speaking for myself as a childless heathen, the thing that I found like deeply problematic about that is he's saying like, I'm going to be a dad, but not a family. There's a distinction in my mind there.
He makes it so much about him.
Yeah,
you know what
there's
I mean?
no
like,
concern
I
for
was
her
trying to
in
do
that.
this. Yeah, exactly.
I'm gonna be a dad, and there's something really poisonous about that. So again, built on sand. The other thing as well, and this is again, we should stress to go back to Death Billiards. This came about as the future anime projects, like bringing new animators in, and they certainly show their chops in many scenes in this, particularly the ones where they're playing like darts, for example, all like the fluid motions, like the wind ups to the bowls, all that stuff. There's some great cuts in here, some great sakuga, but we see a moment where he starts raging at her and he's weeping and he looks like the ugliest. Like, he looks like, basically that, like, for those of you listening on audio, Doc basically went full Salvador Dali on his own face. It was like melting clock. But yeah, that is Takashi, looked super fucking ugly in that one. But when I say ugly, I'm not talking in the sense of just physical, but as an ugly human being.
Is like the inside was displayed on the outside for once. Just
And
it was all out there.
Machiko has a line at that point where she says, why would anyone want to marry you? And that is the immediate line that follows her looking at him, looking like that. And it, again, the house on side, but it's such a damning line. She sees him for who he is. His like grotesque appearance through this exaggerated animation. Again, kudos to where animation does what live action necessarily can't sometimes do. Like his physical ugliness, his animated grotesquerie is the inner self exposed to the world, something she now sees in full for the first time. It's a great moment. And it really goes to show, like, the animators, they can do, like, all the great Sakura cuts of bowling and darts all they want, but they know, even if it is a little obvious, perhaps, how to make character designs work in favor of the story and the character revelations and the drama. It is the good shit.
Yeah. Yeah, and that scene, God, everything that happens. And then if you haven't caught on to everything that's going on in Machiko, it within her in episode 1, episode 2 gives it all to you. You see that, like, I mean, talk about duplicity, right? Talk about like putting on a performance in an act. Like, she sees how her husband like is so like hurt and, you know, it feels so cheated with like what's happened, and is so mistrustful, and like to give him something, some kind of purpose or something to latch onto, some kind of like just small comfort that he was in the right. She plays the role that he accuses her of. She's like, even though she doesn't feel this way, she like musters up her courage and she's turns on him and is like, that's right. I love someone else. This is their baby. Who would ever want you? Like, how much must it be hurting her to say that? These things that she just deeply does not believe and that are not true.
There's a double meaning to those lines as well, because when she says she loves someone else, she loved him as she knew him before this moment.
I was thinking that too.
Which is great. It's great.
Yeah. I love like the person I thought you were. But yeah, I mean, and just really putting it on the line to comfort him, not thinking about herself at all. And so, in my opinion, she's one of the best, if not the best people in the show. And she is damned, you know, her immortal soul is vaporized. And it's like, God damn it. Fuck you, Deshou. You dumbass.
He really screwed the pooch on that one.
Yeah, Nona knows it too. Like,
that's gonna be on his performance review.
Docking your pay.
Okay, so that's that point done. What else can I talk about that's specific rather than broad? Well, let me talk, I suppose, about Yosuke for a moment. There is an image of him sat in front of a TV screen playing a video game, and it's all fuzzy and black, and the words "Game Over" inscribed in blood red, with his face obscured. But that's what the words are, basically. It's the Dark Souls font. Let's be honest.
Is it? I didn't catch that.
It looks like it. It's a similar kind of intent. I mean,
you died.
Well, oops. But I have to say that image was profoundly affecting, because it's the game over is not just, of course, the game itself, but it's how he feels about his life, and is indeed in the moments before he takes his own life. And it feels representative to me. Like, I mean, the fact that it's not focused on like his face, like it could be anyone sat there. It is the state in which far too many fucking people have been in their lives. It is a really, really powerful moment, that, in my opinion, because it feels representative. And it feels like, I mean, the whole scene is like muted colors, but then the game over again is inscribed in blood red on a fuzzy screen. And I'd also argue that in some way the non-specificity of Yosuke's, like, we know that he has a stepmom and he doesn't really get along with her, and like he was bullied and all that. But we don't get much more than that. I actually think the non-specificity here can work because I need to talk, I suppose, for a moment, content warning again, about this particular moment's efficacy as not a didactic PSA, don't take your own life kind of thing, but more how people can resonate with it. And the thing is, like, speaking for myself here as someone who has had suicidal ideation in the past, I don't think, and this is, I mean, I don't have it anymore, so I can't speak as I could back in the past. I don't think the show's message of, well, with the benefit of hindsight, because this character literally has hindsight now, he regrets his choice, might ring with people in the same scenario because, for one, it inherently doesn't happen. If it does, no one's come back to tell us about it, so how can you be sure? And two, it's the thing about hindsight is it's not necessarily an argument all the time about, like, some people are just generally like mentally unwell. Like, maybe reconcile with his mother might help, but his stepmom, that is, but it might not necessarily help him all the way. Like, so I don't think that I can say that that moment works well in like connecting necessarily people who have suicidation because of those things. It feels to me like the idea of hindsight, like, you'll regret it, doesn't ring true. But I also must stress that this show is not, for one, it's not all about Yosuke. I know it sounds awful for me to say, but it is true by virtue of him being a one-shot character in that episode. But two, it's not principally about suicide. This is just one thing that factors into it. And I'm glad it addressed that. Don't get me wrong. So I'm not going to criticize it for this. I'm just going to point out that if you feel unsatisfied by its examination of suicide, it doesn't intend to go that deeply into it. Maybe it should. I'll invite people to put their own judgment on it. And similarly, as someone who's past that point now, thankfully, where I felt like he did, not least of which also because, like him, I have a strained relationship with my actual biological mother. So again, there's that overlap, but I can't deny it. Like, I felt profoundly emotionally affected before by shows I've watched about suicide, like Orange, for example, that we've talked about in the past. This didn't connect with me. Just because I'm not feeling that way anymore doesn't mean I don't relate to like my past experiences, but it didn't affect me in that way. Like the scene I mentioned with that like game over thing, that was like powerful, but that was probably the best, narratively speaking,
sure.
best part of his whole arc. So again, not criticizing the show on this, but I'm just saying that I think that there are stories that tackle the subject better, and that is admittedly through virtue of their longer runtime and greater focus there. But I'm still happy that it at least brought it up, and they had that specific moment in there, which was just so emblematic of so many people's experience, particularly people in Japan. Again, I mentioned Hikikomori specifically as that term next. That's what it felt like he was getting to. Might necessarily be strictly speaking true. Maybe he's just in need. Like, we could quibble about that, but like he's in the wheelhouse.
It implied that he's socially isolated, for sure. I was really happy that that Deshou did not like portray suicide as a sin or like an unforgivable action. He ended up being reincarnated in the end, and I mean, it's just one of many things I find deeply galling and anger-inducing about Catholic dogma is the insistence that suicide is an unforgivable sin, and you're damned if you commit suicide, because that just puts so much blame on the victim. And like, I have a really personal experience with this that I don't want to talk about, but like, I think that I just find so hurtful. And I'm just really happy that you have very like explicitly the show is about religion and the afterlife, praise and blame. and someone who took their own life is shown in a very sympathetic light.
Well,
They're not like condemned for doing that.
it's not even just that, but if I recall correctly, Decim also actually gives both of them like a big group hug at the end and says, "You both did very well." And
Even though Misaki goes to hell, he's like,
yeah,
you did a
that's
good
also
job.
what.
Get in the bad elevator.
Well, I mean, I mean, we can probably blame that on her, like, smashing his head into the cabinet more than anything. But I also really like that line, by the way, fully because I think that, as much as I hate to say it, the world is unfair and people do die before their time for a myriad of reasons. That happens. But I like that line from Decim because, again, if we take like that invested, like, that vested, like, higher order thing where, flawed though he may be, like, he's operating on a different level from us because he's like angelic or whatever you want to call it, whatever form he may take. Those words from him also in turn like carry a lot of weight, particularly also because that's funny enough a little bit of character growth from him because he's recognized the value of their experiences, the trials and the traumas they've been through, and like can say, it's not your fault. You were dealt a bad hand. You tried your best, and yet, yes, but that's
like it's like it just. Oh, I really disliked this outcome for her. Like, especially after that scene. You know what I mean? Especially after the scene you're talking about was such a cool and good scene, and then
yeah, I do agree with that, but yeah. All right. Do I have anything else to talk about? Let me have a look at my notes. I have
can talk
two
about
more.
my broad point if you want.
Yeah, do it. I've talked for long enough.
Well, this probably won't. I don't know. This might not take long, but you and Rackham, how did you describe the show? What was this is the show in a nutshell?
Messy.
Mm-hmm.
Messy was definitely one of the words.
Leo Messi. I should
messy and imperfect.
Paris Saint Germain. Yeah. A show full of messy, imperfect people. And you said it was a messy show. Full of messy, imperfect people. I ultimately, I think, came away from this feeling a little bit like I wish it was messier. There's still something, despite, all the kind of humanity on display that we've talked about. There's still ultimately something I felt like, something about it that made it come off as a little bit cold to me. Maybe it's the fact that there's a structure imposed on everything and there's this rigid rule-based kind of thinking applied to their human lives. But yeah, it was, I don't know. It has its formula and it goes with that for now anyway. And like, yeah, I suppose I don't know. It's, I when you described it as a messy show, I thought like, yeah, I would like a messy show. I would actually really like more kind of a messy show, but maybe it will become messier as we go.
I should probably clarify when I say messy. I'm referring back to stuff like the way the women are portrayed in that it's blind spots, I think, on some of the stuff that happens in it. That's the messiness I'm referring to.
Yeah, right.
As opposed to a more like, here's some more fucks up shit from characters who like got much more like diverse and like complicated histories, shall we say. I'm referring more to like, hey, maybe we shouldn't have all of the women be portrayed the way they do because it seems like
I know. We're operating on a different meaning. I'm like equivocating here, but like I just think it made me think like, man, I want so badly for the show to break out of its straitjacket and formula and I don't know, for it to be even more messy and more human. And yeah, again, I came away from it just feeling still a little cold.
Well, that could happen in time with Chiyuki because by virtue of her being there. She like we see in episode 2, she just kind of woke up. Where did she come from? Is she a human who died and has somehow been accepted from this regime, but like selected to replace? Because there's mention, of course, there was the previous one that she's on a 3-month term. Like there is.
I have a theory.
Like,
I have theories about this, but yes.
Oh boy. But I mean, that's one of the things that Death Parade is also doing. Like beyond having the individual character episodes, it is also covering the central mystery of who like Destin is, where does his system come from, and as I say, that's why I don't want it to end in Yogg-Sothoth, because that would be lame. I want it to end like with a higher authority that believes it's doing the right thing, but ultimately is not, where it is seeking order instead of justice, like, or doesn't understand the meaning of justice or equitable judgment. You name it, basically. Yeah. But I do hear you on that, and I think that there could be latitude for more complicated stories to come out with more difficult backgrounds, like where there's, more like complexities, like shades of grey in there. Because again, that's the thing that Chuki like points out, that like Destin makes his judgment based on more black and white view of the situation. And of course, the show then argues that he's wrong, and by virtue of that argument, we must have more complexity in order to judge that. So yeah,
and it's just like, and I know it's the construct, right, of the show. It's just like, I think frustrating on a deep level to that at the end of the show, it's, left or right, good or bad, binary choice, given like even the limited amount of context that we are shown. There's something that just doesn't sit well with me about that. So
yeah. Okay.
But again, I think that's the point. It may be. So yeah, reserve judgment. Go ahead.
I have 3 more points to make and then we're done. And I'll try and get through these as relatively quickly as I can. The very first one I want to talk about is the transition from Death Billiards to the very first episode, and the changes that happened in the storytelling that makes it suitable for both a new audience but also for old. So the story of Death Billiards, it's the same thing we've said before, but it's just 2 random people who've died simultaneously, a younger guy and an older dude. And so there's the question in Death Billiards of like, hey, I've lived my whole life, whatever. It doesn't matter if I win a like. I'm not going to go into detail on that because that's not important right now. Beyond the fact that these are just 2 random people who die at the same time who otherwise would never have known each other. But episode 1 is a definitive escalation from Death Billiards because it is a married couple who died literally in the same location because they died for a car crash when they were arguing about the honeymoon. And that is a great way to start the series for people who've seen Death Billiards, because they're already familiar with the concept, but the stakes, like the emotional stakes, are much higher because it involves people who are because marriage and all that. So I think that's a great decision from the story, from the writers, to start off with there, that they decide, okay, for our brand new episode, for people who've seen the original one-off, there is that escalated stake. But episode 1 still covers all the necessary ground you need on the rule setting, which works for people who are brand new to it. And also, they never have a massive restatement of the rules after that fact either. Like the one time they kind of sort of do it in episode 3, Destin is explaining it, and if I recall correctly, Chuki's like watching from far away. So they just kind of like cut it out. Like they don't have to re-explain every time. It's efficient, like, because obviously
it's shorter, and she just like does the numbers. Yeah. She's like first, second, third, and like So
it's one of those unfortunate things when you have a system like this where characters are constantly being introduced or unfamiliar to it. You have to re-explain it, but you don't have to re-explain it to the audience. Again, I'm talking about 2 audiences here, of course, in text and actual audience. So how do you accommodate both, like where you see the point being across to them without also re-explaining to us over and over again, boring us half to death? And the show's doing that really well. So they've got a grasp on the fundamentals here, like the solid core behind that stuff. But I just appreciate also how they just moved on from Death Billiards episode 1 and really made it like both appealing to people who've seen Death Billiards, but also those who haven't. Because it would have been all too easy for have a similar situation where it's just 2 random people, old and young, who die, and they'd be like, you could change the context to who they are, change the game, but the stakes, the emotional stakes, would then be similar. But no, the show opens with a higher tempo than that, and I think that really works in its favor to keep it fresh. I'd also just like to mention as well that Death Billiards now fully enough occupies a strange position where, in theory, it's just a standalone episode of the show that could be slotted in, at least as I understand it, pretty much anywhere. Maybe not after the final episode of the show, depending on how you look at it. But you could totally, for example, slot Death Billiards, pretend it's episode 3 before the actual episode 3 and move the other numbers along. And I would not notice. It just works. It's a self-contained story and it fits in well there. So yeah, kudos to the creators for putting in the thought on how they're going to start the first episode for both people who are familiar with Death Billiards and those who are not. Good shit.
Yes.
I like that. Okay. Just refreshing the tank. So let's talk about fighting games. Now, this again might be reading too much into it, and also my own history as a fighting game player, but I actually really enjoyed the inclusion of the arcade game in episode 4 for a couple of reasons. The first of which is, I know I mentioned before about the overly violent thing that Misaki does, but again, you've got the obvious contrast that Yosuke is beating her in a fighting game, but in actual real-life fighting, there is no comparison. There is... like he has no chance against her, whether he's deliberately resisting or not. So there's that contrast of games are not real life, which ties back to what happened with Yosuke, where the game over thing came up, but that wasn't literally game over for his life. He just lost the game there and then. Not the end of the world. But also, let's talk about fighting games in specific as well. Fighting games are inherently unfair. And you might say, how is that true? How is that true, Shads? Because you're playing a skill-based game. But the thing is, going into what I know about fighting games, not all characters in fighting games are made equally. If you're a Guilty Gear Strive player, for example, right now, you'll be very unhappy if you have to fight Saul Bad Guy because he's the best character in the game by a country mile. The game is not inherently fair. So that all ties back into the whole, Decim saying things aren't fair. And it ties into how, like, these representations of them as characters show, oh, you know what? Like, it kind of is true for us too. Like, we're not born or created equally. Our life circumstances don't make us equivalent. We are going to be very different people as a result. So, really nice tie in there. Just look up the idea of tier lists if you ever want to see like how whack it can get. But also, then there is the idea of moves. So obviously both Misaki and Yosuke's characters, which are representations themselves, have special moves. They have super moves which are based on the kids for Misaki and his stepmom for Yosuke. And that's good in itself. But I also just want to talk about the idea behind the moves that they have, which are of course related to their lives. And in a fighting game, your path to victory lies in optimal and efficient use of your tools at hand. And that applies here, but in a broader sense of these characters and how they live their lives, and that their success is about playing to their strengths and, their tools and what they're capable of doing. It works there as well. Granted, that's a bit diluted by the fact that it plays out like an actual fighting game where Misaki loses because she's just not a video gamer. But I still think that something can be said about the fact that it depends on how you use the tools you've got to, come out on top. That makes that work. So yeah, I actually think the fighting game, much as I could again be reading into it too much due to my own knowledge of fighting games, I think that it works on multiple levels to examine them as characters and to explain their lots in life. I think it's a pretty neat concept. Also, entirely authentic arcade cabinets as well. I know those they look pretty spot on.
Yeah, definitely. I really like that. I love the that this fighting game, kind of embarrassed both of them because it kind of laid bare it even if they were outsized persons of their outsized depictions of their personality, it was still true to a certain degree. Very otaku-ish, anime girl statue, like figure uppercut, like was a special move, and like all that kind of stuff. And like they had their little stat sheet talking about like the ability, Misaki's ability special ability was temptation, and things like that were just
Temptation.
that was fun. And I don't know if you caught this, but there was a really cool scene after her kids, you know, she did her super move, which summons all of her children for like basically a Persona style all out attack, right? And they all kind of come on the screen and start beating up Yosuke's character. And the little baby is there. And before the little baby is left on its own, the older kids kind of finish beating on Yosuke and they leave. And so she thinks this is it. This is the all-out attack is done. And she looks at how much health has been taken off Yosuke. And it's not a lot. And she's like, God damn it, they were weak. It's like revealing something about her that like, you know, she might kind of put on this face where she loves her older kids from previous marriages or whatever. But she really believes about them deep down, like, yeah, they're weak. They're not not made of strong stuff, of strong fiber. And you know, it shows who she loves the most, her newest child. You know,
but you know what? If you want to go into critiquing that further, well, they are an extension of her character in the game. They don't exist without her, of course. And so if they are weak, it's because she herself of her is weak.
And that's how she feels about them, right? That's what she believes.
Fighting game as multi-layered metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
This is my wheelhouse. Good. I mean, I'm you know, like the Z-list anime critic, and also like I play fighting games on the side. This is my shit right here. I got this on lock.
Hey, you call yourself Z-list. This week we were the top 20 anime podcasts in Sweden.
What?
That's right. I've always said Swedes are good people. They know their shit.
Yeah, I really enjoy your furniture, especially. Thank you, Sweden. No, seriously, those are IKEA bookshelves right back there. This is the point where they collapse. No,
that would
good.
Be brilliant.
although admittedly would be because I wasn't following the instructions. But anyway, right. My final point, segueing from fighting games, is to talk about games in general in anime and also how they're constructed in Death Parade.
Oh yeah,
and this is where I bring up Kaiji and Kakegurui. So the thing about Kaiji and Kakegurui as shows is that part of their entertainment appeal and part of the tension that they have is related to the rules of the game, the plays that are available at any given time.
Shadon, what about the smell of the game?
Well, it's bullshit blazing. I know that. See, I know.
Carry on.
Don't try me on that. I mean, to be fair, we know the game is bullshit in Death Parade because one person got sent to the Shadow Realm who shouldn't have been. Oh, fuck me. Anyway, right. So
no, the thing about it is not the Shadow Realm. They just don't exist anymore. Like,
I'm sure Yu-Gi-Oh fans might find there's not much of a difference, but I'll let them discuss that. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
it doesn't. So I'm bringing this up though because part of the the entertainment appeal, part of the tension, part of the drive in those shows is not just the stakes that are happening in the game itself, but also the game theory. Like, hey, I've got this hand. Clearly, they must have this hand, and so on and so forth. In Kakegurui, for example, the climactic final showdown it involves tarot cards, and so there's a lot of internal monologuing about how Yumiko can or cannot win at any given time. And without, I won't spoil the outcome, but suffice to say, there is a way out. And then, of course, there's also the Russian roulette thing as well that happens in one of the episodes. But a lot of it's focused on the mechanics of those games and how they then can play out from there. Even Kaiji, even something as simple as, well, I say simple, as walking across like a steel girder atop like a 30-story construction site. There's discussion about that, like about crosswinds, weight, balance, you name it. Like the shows place a great emphasis on the game theory and the mechanics behind them as part of their drama. Death Parade not so much. And this is not a criticism. I'm just bringing it up as a way of comparing and contrasting. Because in Death Parade, like I think the most it ever gets, really, to be quite honest, is with respect to Death Billiards, because there's a number of just diagrams of like certain shots that can be taken at certain points, like angles and all that, which plays into the game. But the darts game, for example, they only have 7 darts from my memory. And I actually looked this up in advance. In order to play a perfect game of darts from 501 to nothing, you need a minimum of 9 darts. So the game already is altered in such a way where they won't reach 0 no matter what they do. But it never draws attention to that fact. That's something you know if you know about darts. And then, of course, we have the bowls, and you don't really need to know much about bowling, to be quite honest. Beyond like scoring and all that, like you don't need to know about what spliss is, for example.
They don't, yeah, and it's different. The rules are not correct. Like the weird house rules where you only get one roll per frame. You're supposed to get two bowls per frame. You know, if you bowl and you only knock over 8, you're meant to get an opportunity to pick up a spade.
Yeah.
But they
don't get that. And I only bring Summer Supply in comparison, but I find it interesting that the show does this. Because again, I think it's more focused on using these games as metaphor not metaphor, but as a means for interplay between the characters. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen in Kaiji or Kakaguri. I mean, there's the entire E-card battle with Tonegawa that lasts like 4 episodes in Kaiji season 1. It's just the most intense shit ever, when he's got like the risk of his fingers being chopped the fuck off. But I'm just pointing out by contrast that Death Parade doesn't go into the game theory because I think in part Kaiji and Kakaguri, like games, were such an integral part of both their stories. And I'm not saying that it's not like important to Death Parade, but it's a means to an end rather than what it is in Kaiji and Kakaguri. Because in Kaiji, the gambling element of it is a criticism of how it exploits the poor and the disaffected. And in Kakaguri, the gambling thing is how it does that, but in turn, how it also protects the privileged and the wealthy.
Yeah.
And in Death Parade, the most ever really goes with that is just the idea that games can be unfair, arbitrary, and chaotic as life can be, but it never goes really beyond that. And I'm okay with that. I think it would be distracting and also a bit unrealistic for the characters. Like, I mean, we get like, the billiards player, the bowling guy, and all that. People who've played these games before, but I'm glad it actually doesn't spend so much time distracting away from the actual human drama there. Like, there's a time and a place for like intense game theory in texts, in fiction. I don't think this is it, and I'm glad it omitted it. But that doesn't, of course, mean that it's bad where it appears in like Kaiji and Kakaguri. In both of those shows, it's really damned effective. But yeah, just wanted to note that contrast there, and the fact that I think it works here. It's again something that you just apply when appropriate.
I was, you just made me think of a big flaw that I have with the show, that there's a scene in the bowling alley and no one says, "Shut the fuck up, Donnie." Criminal.
I mean, the darts thing, like, I'm just going to point out, like, if you think the darts thing goes badly, I will just say that, for one, if they really wanted to, beat the game because they just both wanted to lose, they could have just thrown the darts to the floor deliberately. Like, Decim seems pretty, like, lax when it comes to the rules of the game, If it,
yeah.
And then...
So, I think at this point, right, like, neither one of them are fully aware of what's going on. Like, they still think they're alive and they're playing for their lives. And the husband is shown to be inherently mistrustful and selfish. And so he is gonna, like, that thought of self-preservation. He's not thinking about her. Remember, because like you were pointing out, like, when he was talking about, oh, woe is me, he wasn't talking about his wife, family together. He's talking about himself. So he's very selfish, very self-centered and myopic, and deeply distrustful of his wife. And so it does not surprise me at all that like he breaks their arrangement. And he's like, "Oh, my hand slipped. Oh my god, I accidentally scored. Oh
Yeah.
shit."
Oh,
And then that just starts the whole thing falling down. Go ahead.
yeah. But the note I'll end on is if you think it went badly in the darts game, it went far worse in, of course, that classic moment in Shaun of the Dead when he ends up with one caught in his head. He just pulls out and goes, "But dogs can look up." And that's the note I'm going to end my death parade discussion on, a reference to Shaun of the Dead. Good times.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
All right, then. I think that's it. Shall we move on to rating the episodes?
Sure.
Do you want to go first, or shall I?
Yeah, I'll go first. I like the show a lot, despite some of the things I've said recently in the discussion being negative. I still am positive on the whole about the show. Again, I said at the top, I think that it is, has some really good character drama vignettes. It is a human show. It is an empathetic show in many ways, and has a really clever and interesting depiction of the afterlife, and it's remarkably produced. I love the explosion scene in every episode. I mean, they're always surprised. That's when they know like things are weird.
I love that stock like boom noise that from the whirring machinery. That was in Doom of all things. So I'm glad to see that's back again.
Welcome back. But I think I can't go higher ultimately than I will say 4 Japanese fighting game cabinets out of 5. Because as quality as it is and as neat as the concept is, and it gave us so much to talk about. We talked for a long time. Again, I just think that all the other Yuzuru Takahawa, well, I should say both of the Yuzuru Takahawa shows I've seen, have Tachikawa, not Takahawa, my bad. Yuzuru Tachikawa. His other shows have more heart. And I'm way more emotionally invested. And they're both serials as opposed to episodic, so maybe that has something to do with it. But it just, it just means that, I think because of how the show is, and, that again, I came off feeling cold to me a little bit. My ceiling on it, as high as I can get on it right now, is a 4. The misogyny is, I will reserve judgment for now in terms of like that aspect of it, like really dinging the show for it, because we're early on. But I thought it was a really worthwhile point for you and Riku to bring up and talk about here. It's something that I hadn't thought about very much, but like I'm really glad you pointed it out, because it's very much there and should be highlighted.
Before I go on to my point, I'll just also mention that, again, for clarity's sake here, and I hope the people who've listened to our pod for a while now are clear on this, but I'm not saying you should never write women doing things like sleeping with someone else, or even, like, dare I say, the creepy shit that happens in episode 3 of her game plan. Like, all of those stories in isolation, in a vacuum, are fine. It is a question of how you execute them and what your intent is, and particularly also the frequency of them in your work. Because if these were discrete stories on their own, I probably wouldn't mind so much. That's my point, basically. There's very little I will consider taboo, out and out, but I question always like how it's implemented and what you do with it. And it's like I've said before, when it comes to the more serious, how to put it, like content warning heavy stuff that you can talk about, like your scope for talking that narrows before you start crossing the line, basically. But anyway, I'll move away from that.
Such a small, I mean, misogyny is not small, but I guess like in terms of like, I don't know, this story here, like it doesn't seem, it's just like a thing to know. It's not like fuck this show or the deal breaker kind of thing.
You gave it a 4 out of 5. I think that should be clear. like I know that sometimes nuance is lost on people, but if they can't understand a 4 out of 5, then they shouldn't be listening to this fucking podcast to begin with. Like for all that we say the scores are arbitrary, like they at least you've got your digestible figure there. We feel it should be backed by what we said. And I suppose I should now put my money where my mouth is, and I'm actually going to agree with you pretty much wholeheartedly. I am going to give this show 4 out of 5 sweet ass looking cocktails out of 5. One thing I did not mention because it's not really deserving of a full talking point, but I'll address here. I love how the show looks. I love its color palette. A lot of purples, a lot of like it's neon without being neon. Like it's like if that makes any sense. Like it's gothic without being too dark, but it also isn't too bright. Like the color palette really works for it and gives it its own sense of style. And I think that's what I can definitely say about the show. Like it sticks out on that alone. I think that it's overall very positive about the characters in there. Like, and it has like the nuance to say, like, we're not just simply going to shunt them on into the elevator. Like these people's lives had meaning. I particularly like the touch with like the ending credits to episode 3, for example, where they went on the various dates. Like I like that. I like the idea of like one last big hurrah for these characters, and it's how you spend it that's important. It is, however, as I say, a messy, imperfect execution of the concepts. I do agree with you that I'm going to reserve overall judgment on the women characters till the end, but in these particular episodes, I still think I would have liked a little more context here and there to give more shades of grey to them specifically, and to the men, to be fair. But I also again have to note that time is a limiting factor on all of this. I will also add that one of the other small, like slightly disappointing things, and the reason I've not brought up is ironically the reason it's a problem, is for all that we've talked about, like who Decim is, who Chiyuki is, like even though I spoiled a name, all that, like why is the bar and all that. The show doesn't seem to emphasize the mystery element of that enough for my taste. It's there, you can think about it, but it's not paid much actual like time. It's not spent much currency on it, which I think is actually a problem for the show because the one-off characters are literally that. So the show has to have a through line to keep you coming back week on week beyond just who the X is coming through the bar. Like it needs to have, I think, an ongoing thing to help with that. And that is there, but it just feels a bit boneless at the moment.
I wonder if people like Anime is Lit could, if they ever did an episode on this, like elucidate any like mythological connections, that are going on that might, I don't know, give us more to latch onto about this sort of thing. Like when Nona, like, goes down an elevator into this like foresty, like oasis kind of place and goes into a small little house. Like, what is going on there? Like, either this is just something made up and totally arbitrary, or it's a reference to something. Like, what is who are these meant to, like, these people meant to be, or who are they in folklore, mythology, religion that we don't know? I mean, like, I lack all of that information and context.
I agree with you, but one can also argue that while, like, having that knowledge should enhance your understanding, but not be the prelude to it being there.
Mm-hmm.
We should have at least some idea at this point. Anyway, we are only 4 episodes in, of course. We have many more to go. And I am excited what comes next with the show. Like, it's still, all in all, a good time, even if it is about awful shit happening. Like, it's emotionally resonant. It still has its fun moments. It's a worthwhile watch. And its flaws are those of execution rather than ill intent, which I'll take any day, to be honest, as opposed to the alternative.
Hear, hear. Yeah.
Hear, hear. All right.
Well, I guess that's it. I guess we've done it. It's time to sign off Deshou the Third, because we have we're at the end of the Death Parade for episodes 1 through 4. Shadon, thanks for hanging out and discussing things as usual. If people want to chat with you about the show or other things more, how would they do that?
You can start by buying me a drink. Then I'll talk for hours. Give me an Elvis juice, distilled from the finest Elvises. Well, you can of course find me at Shadon1010. You can also, if you're one of our patrons, talk to me in the Discord. that all works. You know how this goes. You know how social media works. You're on the internet. You're listening to, me talk about anime. You surely should have some clue how this all goes down. And if you're not on social media, keep it that way. Not because I don't like you, because you're doing the right thing.
Yes, I agree. That endorse that so very much. If you'd like to get in touch with me, I can be found at the Subtle Doctor on Twitter. And of course, if you want to keep up with the show, you can subscribe to our Twitter at Warui Deshou. You can subscribe to us in many, many places. YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you subscribe to us, whether it's YouTube or a podcast player, be kind enough to please leave us a review, to subscribe, follow us, to give us a thumbs up, a comment, perhaps, like any kind of engagement, that helps us with our discoverability, which means like more people can be a part of what we're doing, which benefits not just us, but like you guys as well, because we have quite a fun Discord community that you could be a part of if you subscribe to our Patreon, which is totally voluntary if you do not want to. No harm, no foul. But if you do support us that way, you can, in patreon.com/Warui Deshou, you can, have all kinds of benefits conferred upon you, like exclusive content and Discord access, Discord roles, movie nights, game nights, all sorts of fun things that you could go to that page and see what they are. And I think, so with all that said, that's it for Death Parade. We will be back for now. We will be back next week to revisit Sunny Boy and talk about the most current goings on with that delightful mystery weirdness.
It's gonna get crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. So until then, he's Shadon. I'm Doc. This has been Warui Deshou. Until next time, embrace each other, everyone, to the ends of the universe.
Good night. Take care, everyone.
Bring back the brothers.
Yeah.